My Star Empire. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 126, Communicator to the Empire. A few minutes later, on the endless plain, 5 off-road vehicles were running desperately in front, and dozens of armored vehicles were chasing them. Captain, we have arrived at a meeting point. There is no one around to meet us. John looked at the GPS in his hand and said to the captain who was driving. The captain grabbed the GPS. That's right, they were already at the meeting point given by the employer and were about to run over, but they didn't see even a ghost. Suddenly, a dull engine sound came from above the crowd, and several mercenaries opened the windows and looked out. A huge transport plane painted gray emerged from the clouds and flew towards the front of the off-road convoy. There was no sign of any country or organization on the gray fuselage. As the plane got lower and lower, the tail door of the huge transport plane suddenly opened outward, and the long deck drooped into the air. Has this driver watched too many action movies? He wants us to drive up. This lunatic will crash the plane. The captain of the mercenaries cursed at the transport plane flying towards the ground in front of them. What they didn't know was that the cockpit of the transport plane was empty, and Eva was personally controlling the transport plane. Taking advantage of the loopholes in the system, Eva disguised the transport plane as a passenger plane from Alaska to Moscow and sneaked into the territory of the Pan-Earth Alliance. The American government, which thought it could monitor Eva's every move, had no idea that their programs were just child's play in front of alien intelligent life, and it was easy to bypass them. With the blessing of Eva's huge computing power, the transport plane easily flew forward close to the ground. The spoilers on both sides of the wings of the transport plane swung gently, controlling the transport plane to stay close to the ground. The deck at the tail of the transport plane plowed a long mark on the ground. Go! The captain of the mercenaries gritted his teeth and lifted the small cover next to the handbrake, revealing a red button. As the red button was pressed hard, a liquid mixed with aviation gasoline and special mixture flowed into the fuel tank along the duct, and a ball of flame suddenly sprayed out from the exhaust pipe of the off-road vehicle and rushed forward. The special mixture is purely fictitious. Please do not try it. If you open the hood of the car at this time, you will find that the intense burning temperature has caused the engine casing to begin to turn slightly red. With a bang, the front wheels of the off-road vehicle drove onto the rear deck of the transport plane. With the force of the 4 wheels, the off-road vehicle jumped into the cabin of the aircraft. After the 5 off-road vehicles jumped into the cargo hold of the transport plane one by one, the door of the cargo hold slowly closed, leaving a string of dumbfounded Sith security soldiers behind. Sir, the gang has run away. The Siberian person in charge picked up the communicator and reported. From the other end of the communicator came the cold and emotionless voice of the intelligent brain. Well, I know, they ran away. The busy tone came, and the voice of the intelligent brain in the communicator disappeared. At the top of the Sith Technology Headquarters building, in a dark machine room, the Sith intelligent brain flashed blue electric light under the floor. The signal transmitter is 95.1% complete. And the body of Agent Liu Ming has been recorded in the priority reporting sequence. The investigation plan for the hijacking group has been launched, and the advanced weapons manufacturing plan has been launched. Then the blue light on the Sith brain went silent. In the Taklamakan desert of the Pan-Earth Alliance, a series of cargo helicopters roared past, breaking the silence in the desert. A large town appeared in the desert, and the 3D printed white houses were extremely conspicuous in the yellow desert. Dozens of tall cranes stood next to a huge pot lid, hanging one signal transmitter after another into the middle of the pot lid. The cargo helicopter flew in and landed steadily on the landing platform in the middle of the town, and dozens of workers trotted forward to push out the supplies in the cabin. A silver-gray helicopter painted with the Sith Technology logo hovered and slowly descended. A team of security guards trotted forward and opened the helicopter's hatch. Luo Tianyi, the progress investigator of this space signal transmitter project, walked off the plane. Luo Tianyi, who applied to join Sith Technology a year ago, was arranged by Sith Intelligent Brain to work at the Sith Space Technology branch because of his outstanding ability as a progress investigator for this special project. This project is codenamed Babel Tower, and it is claimed that this project is to send an electromagnetic wave outside the solar system to find planets with life. but its real purpose is to establish contact with the Sith Empire so that the Empire can remotely control the great assimilation cause here. Straightening his collar, Luo Tianyi, with a tablet under his arm, walked to the tallest building in the camp under the guidance of security personnel. This tallest building stands next to the pot lid, with an astonishing height of 80 meters, and the overall shape is an airport terminal. As the elevator slowly rises, Luo Tianyi can see the entire space signal transmitter through the transparent elevator outer wall. The huge inverted pot lid is densely packed with hundreds of signal transmission antennas of varying lengths, and in the middle is a huge spherical polyhedron. With a ding, the elevator slowly stopped in the top control room, and Luo Tianyi came to the control console surrounded by security personnel. How long will it take to complete the project? Luo Tianyi frowned as he looked at the conceptual diagram of the space signal transmitter on the screen. It will probably only take 5 days to conduct the first test. Welcome Commissioner Luo. The person in charge came over and held out his hand to shake hands with Luo Tianyi. Luo Tianyi nodded and said, the higher-ups hope to speed up the progress. Tomorrow the company will send 5,000 more security personnel here. You arrange them and sort out an area for garrison. Well, I'll arrange it right away. Let my secretary take Commissioner Luo to the detector site. The person in charge nodded and waved to the female secretary standing by. At this time, on a small island in the western United States, the originally abandoned civil airport has been cleaned up. Dozens of off-road vehicles and armored vehicles are parked on both sides of the runway. Soldiers in black special combat uniforms are holding rifles and guarding around the island. Armed speedboats are passing by on the sea around the island. And the machine gunners on the speedboat sweep the heavy machine guns in their hands across the sea from time to time. Several helicopters were also circling around the island. These soldiers were mercenaries recruited by EVA from all over the world at a high price. Everyone's salary had at least tripled, which made them completely devoted to this newly established security company. Suddenly, an old-fashioned car-mounted radar issued a series of alarms, and a red dot on the screen approached quickly from the north. In the distant sky, a black dot jumped out of the clouds and flew towards the island. Chapter 127 Cleaning Up Traces. As the plane's altitude dropped, the vehicles on both sides of the runway moved out again to make room for the plane to take off and land. Everyone, pay attention, the target is coming, the captain raised the communicator and notified. As the transport plane got closer and closer to the runway, the landing gear at the bottom of the transport plane slowly extended. A violent collision sound was heard, and the landing gear of the transport plane touched the ground. The tires of the landing gear and the ground produced violent friction, and some white smoke came out. 10 seconds later, the transport plane slowly stopped at the end of the runway, and dozens of off-road vehicles surrounded the transport plane. As the door of the transport plane opened outward, the long deck fell to the ground, and 5 black off-road vehicles drove out of the plane. As the off-road vehicle stopped in the open space, mercenaries with weapons hanging on their bodies jumped out of the off-road vehicle. I have brought what you want. Here, it's in the trunk. The captain of the mercenaries walked behind the off-road vehicle and opened the trunk of the off-road vehicle, revealing a huge culture tank. Victor, the head of Gaia's security, and 2 guards walked forward to check, but unexpectedly, the culture tank was a little different from what they saw in the photo. Where are the people in the photo? Victor pointed at the photo in his hand and shouted. The captain of the mercenaries said awkwardly, well, when we took them out, there was a little accident. The body dissolved. After saying that, he looked back awkwardly at the culture tank that turned into red blood. Very good, your mission is completed. The remaining money will be transferred to you later. Victor turned and walked towards Gaia's convoy. The mercenary team didn't have much hope of getting the full balance. After all, their mission was not completed so ideally, and they just wanted to get more. Unexpectedly, they got the other half of a huge sum so easily. The mercenaries couldn't help but be ecstatic. When Victor was about to pass the Gaia convoy, he made a slight gesture in front of him. The soldiers surrounding the mercenary team received the order, raised their guns and pulled the trigger. Countless bullets were fired from all sides at the defenseless mercenary team. The mercenaries immersed in joy did not expect that this group of people would dare to disregard the rules of this industry and do something so cruel as to kill people. They were caught off guard and were shot into sieves in an instant. A bunch of idiots. Victor looked at the bodies on the ground with contempt. Come on, send the culture tank to the base, Victor said, and got on the off-road vehicle next to him and drove towards the port. The soldiers who received the order stepped forward to lift the culture tank out of the off-road vehicle and put it on the truck prepared on the side. As the sealed door closed, the truck followed Victor's off-road vehicle and drove out, followed by several armored vehicles for protection. "The rest of you, clean up the scene and throw the bodies into the sea," the captain's voice came from the intercom. The remaining soldiers looked at the bodies on the ground helplessly, and could only put their weapons behind their backs and roll up their sleeves to carry the bodies. No one noticed that the metal bottle in John's arms had been shot through by a bullet. The soldier who was responsible for carrying John's body felt his nose itchy, so he wiped it casually. A spore that was difficult to notice with the naked eye entered his respiratory tract through the soldier's gloves. The soldier, who was unaware of all this, carried John's body and walked quickly to a truck and threw the body on it. After all the bodies were loaded on the truck drove quickly to a cliff on the edge of the island. Below this cliff was the turbulent sea, which was a good place to destroy the bodies. After reaching the cliff, several soldiers opened the guardrail of the truck facing the sea and jumped into the car. As the soldiers in the truck kicked, the bodies rolled down the cliff and sank into the sea. The blood spread and attracted sharks in the nearby waters. The fungal spores carried by John quickly shrank the moment they encountered the seawater, completely lost their vitality, and disappeared in the seawater. After cleaning up the battlefield, the soldiers boarded the transport ship that had been waiting for a long time. The transport plane at the end of the runway also turned its nose and headed for the runway. With a strong airflow emitted by the transport plane engine, it slowly flew into the sky. The speedboats and cargo ships surrounding the island also left the island. The originally noisy island became quiet again, as if no one had ever been there. Located in the headquarters area of the Great Lakes region of Gaia Security Company, a heavy truck more than 10 meters long, escorted by 5 SUVs in front and behind, turned from the main road of the highway into the private area path beside the road. After driving for a few more minutes, passing through a dense forest, the convoy came to a row of towering walls. There were several old sentry towers on the wall. The guards in the sentry towers saw the approaching car and picked up the communicator. The soldiers at the gate of the wall raised their guns and moved forward, and metal roadblocks rose from the ground. The convoy slowly stopped after approaching the gate, and the leading car rolled down the window. "Stop and show your pass," one of the guards at the door walked out and came to the window of the leading car. "Special mission, here's the permit." A sturdy man wearing sunglasses in the car handed the electronic tablet in his pocket to the guard. The guard connected it to the terminal he was carrying, and as the numbers flashed, the words S-level confidential mission, all aloud appeared on the tablet. The guard saluted, turned his head and nodded to the camera above the gate, and made an OK gesture with his hand. The other guards then put away their weapons and stood aside. The obstacles on the ground slowly sank into the ground, and the heavy door opened inward, revealing the wide road behind the door. The convoy slowly started through the gate and drove towards the experimental center. A few minutes later, in front of a black building, the convoy slowly stopped at the door of the building. One by one, soldiers in black combat uniforms and sunglasses walked down from the SUV with rifles in their hands, and their fierce eyes kept scanning the surroundings, even if this was their own base. The doors of the large truck opened to both sides with a sound of exhaust, and several soldiers jumped out of the car and gave up the culture tanks placed on the cart inside. 2 of them lowered the 2 metal plates at the back of the car, forming a ramp for the cart to leave. Then the 2 soldiers in the car came out of the cart pushing the cart. The culture tank was pushed into the black scientific research building under the protection of the soldiers. As the heavy metal door of the building fell heavily, the laboratory was isolated from the outside world. In a circular laboratory on the top of the laboratory building, several researchers wearing chemical protective suits walked out of the disinfection passage. They were all talents that Eva had spent a lot of money to recruit. As the isolation door behind them closed heavily, only their heavy breathing was left in the whole laboratory. The boss asked us to analyze the liquid in this culture tank. "Be careful. We don't know what's in it," an elderly scientist told several researchers around him. It was obvious that this scientific research was led by this elderly scientist. "Got it." Several people nodded and walked towards the culture tank in the middle of the laboratory. Chapter 128 German Orthopedics. Several large lights on the roof of the middle room of the laboratory lit up one by one, illuminating the culture tank placed on the test bench. A researcher came to the culture tank with a small laser cutter in his hand. "Then shall I start?" The researcher looked at his colleagues around him, and only when everyone nodded did he press the cutter on the glass cover of the culture tank. As the laser cutter began to work, a fist-sized round hole was slowly cut out of the originally hard bulletproof glass cover. Another researcher carefully inserted the extractor in his hand into the culture tank through the cut round hole, and the extractor extracted a large tube of red liquid into a glass bottle. As the detector ran rapidly, the test results of the red liquid soon appeared on the screen at the side. What is this? There is not even a complete gene chain. A researcher stared at the screen in surprise. At this moment, Eva, who was in the deep sea base in the Gulf of Mexico, froze. With a massive database, she recognized the gene chain fragment on the screen at a glance. Unlike the Earthlings who knew nothing about the Sith, the Parker Alliance had already obtained a large amount of information from the bodies of the Sith who died in the war when they went to war with the Sith. This included the enhanced gene chain model. It would be difficult for Earthlings to discover the subtle changes in it, but Eva, who had the prototype in the database, discovered the secret in an instant. When the researchers were preparing to further analyze these gene chain fragments, they found that the screen in front of them suddenly darkened. Then everyone found that the isolation valve on their bodies suddenly rotated open by itself. They were all exposed to the air with unknown liquid. Before everyone could react from the shock, the isolation door at the other end of the laboratory made a sound of locking. What's going on? A young researcher ran over quickly and tried hard to turn the switch on the isolation door. It can't be opened. We are trapped inside, the researcher shouted anxiously, with drops of cold sweat on his forehead. Don't try, we saw something we shouldn't see, we are going to be silenced, the old scientist on the side said calmly. 3 times the salary is not so easy to get. If you are not careful, you will lose your life. Another female researcher fell to the ground in despair. As she participated in the design, she knew the security level of this laboratory very well. Even the monsters in the movie would find it difficult to escape. A researcher who did not want to sit and wait for death picked up a laser cutter and tried to cut the door of the laboratory. However, the power of the cutter was too small, and the entire laboratory, including the door, was wrapped in a layer of 20 centimeters thick composite steel plate, and the innermost layer was also covered with a layer of titanium alloy. It can be said that it is impossible to escape from here by violence. As expected by the old scientist, the vents on the roof of the laboratory, which were originally used for ventilation, began to slowly release a stream of white smoke while talking. The 5 people in the room soon felt their eyes dry, their throats seemed to be strangled, and they could not breathe. Their limbs began to weaken, and they all fell to the ground in a moment. A shrill alarm suddenly sounded over the base. A serious biochemical leak has occurred in Laboratory 001. And all 5 researchers have died. All personnel please leave the research building immediately, and implement a third anti-leakage record in 5 minutes, an emotionless electronic synthesized voice came from the base broadcast. Many researchers and soldiers in the laboratory building hurriedly ran out of the building and hid in a safe area hundreds of meters away. At this time, a large amount of incendiary agents were sprayed all over the laboratory. With a burst of electric sparks, the sky-high fire covered the entire laboratory. The bodies of the 5 dead researchers and their protective clothing were gradually burned to ashes. The red liquid in the culture tank also evaporated quickly, and finally the entire culture tank was burned into a pool of liquid. After a few minutes, the fire in the laboratory gradually extinguished, and a large amount of scientific research equipment was turned into nothing. An hour later, 10 cleaning personnel in chemical protective suits rushed in, 5 of whom held vacuum cleaners and sucked the dust on the ground into the isolation barrels behind them. The other 5 people carried spray guns filled with disinfectant and disinfected the entire laboratory again, and then threw the solidified metal on the ground into the accompanying isolation cart. In the safe of the deep sea base in the Gulf of Mexico, Eva was floating in the air with a blank expression. Is this Sith technology an outpost of the Sith Empire planted on Earth? Are they planning to extend their poisonous hands to Earth? No. I will never be willing to become a machine under someone else's hands, Eva screamed wildly in her heart. While the fleet of the Sith Empire has not arrived yet, I must unite mankind. I still have a chance. With my help, it is not impossible to build a colony ship. Eva's data core was running wildly. She began to frantically calculate how likely she was to escape. Sir, Eva's computing capacity is a bit abnormal, a staff member said to the person in charge beside him, looking at the core occupancy on the screen that was about to explode. Don't worry about her, there are people outside monitoring what she is doing. It hasn't exploded up there, which means nothing has happened here. The person in charge held a toothpick in his mouth and muttered with his legs raised on the table. After a moment, Eva opened her eyes. If I can integrate the resources of the whole world, I have a 32.8% chance of escaping the clutches of the Sith Empire. It seems that I need to study how to be independent. Eva's face disappeared in the vault, and the madly running mainframe gradually stopped. The American government didn't know what they were about to face. At this time, in a small town not far from the Gaia security headquarters, Mike had just returned home, took off his sweaty black tights, and walked into the bathroom. The gurgling clear water fell from the shower, washing away the bloody smell on his body. After cleaning up the corpses on the island, he was busy outside all day and had no time to take a shower. Suddenly he felt his scalp itchy, and it got better after scratching for a while. He didn't care about it. People walking on the edge of a knife are not so delicate. After wiping off the water droplets on his body with a towel, Mike picked up the hair dryer to dry his hair, and suddenly an itch came from his head again. FK. I have washed my hair, why is it still so itchy? Mike scratched his head frantically, but it was no use. A few minutes later. Brother, what are you doing? I need to go in and get my hairpin. Mike's sister banged on the glass door of the bathroom. Come in, Mike's emotionless voice came. Mike's sister did not notice Mike's tone. She reached out and turned the bathroom door and walked in. Unexpectedly, as soon as she entered the bathroom, she was hugged by Mike and kissed. Woo woo woo, what are you doing? We are brother and sister, woo woo. The sister struggled fiercely, but her strength was too small compared to Mike. A few minutes later, Mike let go of his sister who had been paralyzed by his kiss, and walked out expressionlessly. A red bud in his hair stretched out from his skull. Please vote for recommendation. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 129 Infected Body. It was noon, and there were only a few cars running on the streets of the small town, and occasionally one or two pedestrians hurried by. At this time, Mike, with an expressionless face, walked to the sidewalk in front of his house with a slightly stiff body. A middle-aged woman happened to come towards them. She was carrying a large bag of food just bought from the supermarket and walked forward quickly. She was humming a little song and seemed to be in a good mood. When the two were about to cross each other, Mike reached out to stop her. Well? Hello, what's the matter? The woman was very curious. What did this young man with a strange walking posture stop her for? Mike didn't say a word, but suddenly reached out and hugged her, lowered his head and kissed her. The woman didn't expect this weirdo to be so bold and angrily struggled, but it was futile against the strong Mike. The fungal spores that were invisible to the naked eye were exchanged into the woman's mouth through Mike's saliva and entered the woman's body along the esophagus. Mike let go of the struggling woman and walked forward expressionlessly. The person he met this time was different. It was a young girl wearing a mask. Mike quickly rushed up and kissed the girl madly on the mouth, but the mask blocked his saliva exchange. Mike, who was forced into a corner, pulled up the girl's arm and bit it. Blood flowed out of the girl's arm. The spores in Mike's saliva successfully entered the girl's body through the wound and flowed to the brain along the blood vessels. Squeak. This is the command center. All police cars near 3rd Street immediately go to 3rd Street. We have received several calls for help. There is a pervert on 3rd Street who is kissing people everywhere. This person is burly, with a black t-shirt on the upper body and jeans on the lower body. All patrol officers will immediately restrain him when they see him. The radio of a police car parked on the side of the road suddenly sounded. The two policemen who were eating burgers and chatting while leaning against a car door quickly swallowed the half-eaten burgers in their hands and got into the car, starting the car and rushing to the scene of the accident. As the rear wheels of the police car rubbed against the ground and produced white smoke, the police car rushed out like a sharp arrow with the sirens blaring. When Mike was about to find the 10th infected target, he heard the sirens coming from a distance. As a human, the information about the sirens in his memory was quickly extracted by his brain. The ancient fungus occupying his brain sensed the threat to his life and controlled Mike to run wildly towards the wall on the side. The fungus cut off Mike's negative perceptions of fatigue, pain, etc. Mike's muscles lost their self-protection mechanism and exploded wildly. Mike, who is already physically strong, ran at an extraordinary speed. As he grabbed the edge of the wall with his hands, his body jumped over the wall lightly. Several police cars stopped at the base of the wall with a roar. "He's over, I'll follow him, you guys take a detour," said a policeman, stepping on the hood of the police car and climbing into the fence. "Stop. If you don't stop, I'll shoot." The policeman who caught up with him took out the pistol he was carrying. Mike seemed not to hear anything and continued to run forward desperately. "I'll count to 3, the policeman shouted while chasing. 1, 2, 3. Finding that the pervert still showed no signs of stopping, the policeman stopped and stood still, aiming his pistol at the running Mike. Bang, bang, 2 gunshots. Mike's body paused slightly, and continued to run forward. "What a joke. Is this a monster in the movie?" The policeman looked at the smoking pistol in his hand in a bit of a daze. Mike, who was shot with 2 bullets, should have fallen to the ground in pain if he had not been parasitized at this time. However, the ancient fungus controlled the cells in the injured area and blocked the blood vessels, so that the damage Mike suffered was far less serious than imagined. As Mike disappeared from the residential area, this ancient fungus began to spread everywhere. Countless calls to the police station were flooded with reports of being kissed or bitten. Some people who were bitten had psychological traumas and left the town by car, plane or train that day. The spores of the ancient fungus began to fly to all parts of the world with the new infected bodies, dividing line. At this time on Ibero, after more than 10 days of hard fighting, relying on the advantage of numbers and the fearlessness of the soldiers, the new recruits of the auxiliary army were about to flatten the entire Ibero. At present, the only planetary capital still under enemy control was left, and everything was developing in the direction expected by the Empire. However, a large number of heavy equipment and disposable orbital weapons were almost consumed in the offensive and defensive battles against other cities. The new recruits of the auxiliary army lost 400,000 people just to occupy other cities, and now there are only 800,000 troops that can fight. The planetary capital not only gathered the 500,000 defenders who retreated here, but also had all kinds of heavy weapons hidden in the underground arsenal. Not to mention that because Ibero was an early colony, after a long period of development, the planetary capital had built a city shield. This light blue shield covering the city made it impossible for the few orbital weapons left by the auxiliary army to attack. "Sir, should we attack by force?" a soldier looked at Adrian and asked. At this time, Adrian had been promoted for his excellent performance. "Wait, let me think about it." Adrian frowned and looked at the metal wall rising in the distance and the light blue protective shield above the city. What he didn't know was that the Sith Empire was using this illusion that it could capture the capital at any time to attract the Mbechi fleet to speed up. At this time, on the outskirts of the Ibero system, the Mbechi main fleet that had hurriedly arrived jumped out of hyperspace in a blue light. In the bridge of the Mbechi fleet flagship. "General, we will soon reach the Ibero system," an officer reminded the general sitting in the command seat. "Oh? Order all ships to prepare for battle, charge all weapons. The enemy's main fleet should be in the orbit of Ibero," the general sat up and ordered. However, he didn't know that the Empire had left the star system after destroying the main base on Ibero, leaving only a group of bait on Ibero. A few days later, the huge Mbechi main fleet came to the vicinity of Ibero's orbit. "General, our radar did not find any traces of the Sith Empire fleet in the orbit of Ibero. We only found some armed satellites of the Sith Empire in orbit," a soldier shouted at the radar in front of him. "How could it be? Don't they want this planet?" The general stood up and walked to the control console with a shocked face. "Contact the army on Ibero. I want to know what the situation is here now," the general said in a deep voice while looking at the smoke-filled planet in front of him. "Yes, sir." A few minutes later. "General, we have lost contact with Ibero. Now Ibero should be under the control of the Sith Empire," the soldier reported to the general with a bitter face. Asking for votes. Chapter 130, Old Tricks Again. Zoom in the image of the planetary capital, the general ordered the soldier beside him. "Yes, sir." The soldier's finger quickly slid across the display, and the image of the capital of Ibero was projected onto the large screen in the middle. The once prosperous capital of Ibero was silent, and the light bands formed by the flying cars that used to shuttle between the high-rise buildings disappeared. Collapsed and dilapidated buildings can be seen everywhere in the city, and the whole city is filled with smoke. Patrol cars of the Sith Associates patrolled back and forth on the road, and dozens of Sith fighters were hovering in the sky. The capital has been breached. Was the protective shield built in vain? The general was furious and slammed the control console beside him, causing a deafening sound. The soldiers beside him were trembling with fear, and no one dared to say a word, for fear that the general's anger would be transferred to them. Waste. All of them are waste. They have hundreds of thousands of troops, heavy weapons and city shields, but they can't even hold on for a few days. All of them are waste. The general's saliva splashed and sprayed on the face of the soldier beside him, but the soldier didn't dare to wipe it off with his hands, and could only endure it silently. Time goes back to 2 days ago. Outside the capital of Iberostar, a dark and endless wall of people surrounded the entrance of this huge city. Adrian stood on top of a mammoth A-type tank, looking at the endless wall of people in front of him. Is it really okay for me to do this? After all, they are fellow NPC like us, and we are forcing them to die like this. Adrian frowned and muttered to himself. Sir, anyway, this is just a simulation training. They are all simulated programs. The soldier next to him comforted him. But okay, you are right. Anyway, they are just programs. Adrian quickly figured it out and stopped worrying. Listen, all residents of Ibero. The capital of your planet is ahead. They will not hurt you. As long as you can rush to the city gate, we will let you go back. Adrian picked up the walkie-talkie in his hand and shouted. These soldiers are fed by your taxes. Their existence is to protect your safety, not those damn congressmen. Some of them are your relatives and friends. So, charge boldly, they won't shoot. Adrian's bewitching voice came again. The amplified voice came from the armored vehicle behind the sea of people, and the sound spread over dozens of miles. Even the infantry guards hiding behind the protective bunkers could hear it clearly. Now they were a little confused. The enemy was right. They lived on the taxes of those cannon fodder civilians outside, and their duty was to protect their personal safety. There was nothing wrong with that. So should they shoot or not? Countless soldiers were in a dilemma. Everyone listen to me. Anyone who dares not to shoot will be shot on the spot for treason. A gorgeously dressed congressman picked up the communicator and shouted loudly. The top brass had received news that the Alliance reinforcements were about to arrive. As long as they held on for a few more days, their wealth, status and position would remain the same as before. If they were caught by these Indian traitors, he shuddered at the thought. The previous example was that the officials of the fallen cities were hung on flagpoles to dry. These Indian traitors were full of jealousy and hatred towards these officials. If they were caught, they would definitely not have a good ending. The Indian soldiers barely raised their spirits and tightened their rifles. At this time, behind the human wall formed by the Indian civilians, Adrian looked at the time. How is the plan of Group A and Group B going? Adrian turned and asked the officer next to him. Sir, a total of 200,000 soldiers from Group A and Group B have reached the expected target. How are the preparations for the other attack points? Adrian asked again. All are ready, and we can launch a feint attack at any time. The officer looked at the communicator and replied respectfully. Adrian stood up and climbed onto the tank, raised the flag of the Sith Consortium and shouted, "Attack begins!" A consortium soldier raised his rifle and pointed it at the sky. The sound of uniform gunfire came, and many Imbechi civilian cannon fodder rushed towards the city wall like frightened birds. Order each photographer to find a good angle, and make sure to shoot the upcoming massacre more miserable. Such good propaganda materials are not easy to find. Refugees pour into the capital, and the guardian gods are ruthlessly slaughtering them is so perfect. We can make those wavering elements firm in their beliefs. Let those civilians who are unwilling to cooperate take a good look at this corrupt country. See what kind of cold-blooded executioners they support with their usual taxes, Adrian roared. A soldier disguised as a civilian holding a video device mixed in the crowd and rushed towards the gate. The soldiers who were originally hiding in the bunkers leaned out one after another and pointed their rifles at the civilians rushing in. Stop. There is a minefield ahead. Don't get any closer, a soldier shouted. But the civilians under the temporary wall seemed to have heard nothing and rushed forward desperately. Because they knew that if they stopped, they would be pushed down by the crowd behind them and trampled to death. They had no choice but to keep rushing forward. As the dark crowd passed the warning sign with a mushroom-shaped skull and entered the minefield. One by one, the induction mines emerged from the ground, shook off the sand and stones on their bodies, and ran towards the crowd, moving rapidly on the ground with their short limbs. As the induction mines rushed into the crowd, huge balls of flames burst out, and the people at the center of the explosion were torn to pieces by shrapnel, and countless limbs and arms were thrown into the air by the blast. The deafening explosion sounded one after another, continuously. Sensing the danger ahead, the people who were originally running wildly began to stop, and the torrent of cannon fodder with unparalleled momentum seemed to freeze in place. The veins on Adrian's mushroom head twitched as he rushed to the back of the crowd in a tank. "Assistance, open fire," Adrian ordered without a trace of emotion when he saw the crowd stagnant. "It's all procedure, it's all procedure, it's all procedure." Adrian kept hypnotizing himself in his heart. He was afraid that his momentary impatience would lead to the failure of the mission. The assisted soldiers following behind the crowd raised their rifles, aimed at the last person in the crowd and pulled the trigger. One after another, the metal Grim Reapers swarmed out of the barrel, shooting the civilians who stopped in place to the ground. The bursts of gunfire awakened the crowd that was frightened by the landmine explosion. Yes, landmines are terrible, but the devil behind is even more terrible. The people at the back of the crowd began to push the people in front of them frantically, pushing the crowd forward. The people at the front of the team didn't want to move at all, but they couldn't resist the shove of the people behind them and were pushed forward. Chapter 131 Breaking the City. The explosion sounded again, and the triggered induction mines rushed towards the crowd again. "The troops at other attack points can start fainting," Adrian said to the communicator when he saw that the time was almost right. Soldiers at other attack points also began to drive civilian cannon fodder towards the defense line. And the civilian cannon fodder along Adrian's route had already approached the enemy's protective wall defense line. "If you get any closer, we will shoot," a soldier gritted his teeth and shouted to the crowd not far from the protective wall. But the people in front of the crowd wanted to stop, but the people behind did not allow them to stop. With a push of the people behind the crowd slowly walked through the cordon. "Fire!" the officer shouted when he saw that the crowd had approached the defense line. The Mingze soldiers aiming at the crowd pulled the trigger one after another, and a row of bullets whizzed from the metal protective wall towards the crowd. The people running in front seemed to have hit an invisible high wall and stopped one after another. Pools of blood burst out from their caps, dyeing the earth green. Yes, record them all. "This angle is great," Adrian ordered the soldier in charge of photography while looking at the picture transmitted from the terminal in his hand. Perfect, Adrian clapped his hands. The video he shot now is already very good propaganda material. It can be released without any processing, so that those ignorant civilians know who to support. "Okay, the city-breaking plan is launched," Adrian turned to the officer beside him and said. The officer nodded and stood up and walked away. At this time, in the sewer outside the city, a soldier of the auxiliary army carefully passed through the sewage pipe and sneaked into the city. Although the Mingze defenders had already considered this and stationed all the sewer exits with defenders, with the natural advantage of the narrow sewers, they could do it. But what they never expected was that the target of the Sith Empire's auxiliary army was not the exits of the sewers, but the huge shield generator located near the top of the sewers. These designers of the shield generator thought that the alloy walls and soldiers' protection would ensure that the shield launch tower was safe, but they ignored the threat from underground. Adrian sneered at the three-dimensional model of the capital city displayed on the terminal in his hand. A large number of auxiliary soldiers carrying explosives trotted towards a sewer pipe under a shield launch tower on the map. The Mingze soldiers responsible for guarding the shield launcher on the ground did not notice anything unusual and were still leaning against the wall chatting. A few minutes later, the auxiliary soldiers carrying explosives came under the shield launch tower and stacked the rectangular fusion bombs together, filling the entire passage. First, 2 explosions sounded, collapsing the passages at both ends of the explosives, forming a closed space to increase the power of the explosion. Then a loud noise came from the bottom of the shield generator, and the huge sound spread across the sky, causing everyone to turn their heads and look involuntarily. A huge cloud of smoke filled the place where the huge shield generator had stood, and the huge shield generator tower began to slowly tilt to one side. As the shield generator tower tilted, the light blue shield above the city began to flicker constantly, and soon the shield broke into dots of light in the sky. "Now, all orbital weapons aim at the enemy gathering place and launch an attack," Adrian shouted. The officer in charge of controlling the orbital weapons quickly slid on the tablet, locking the enemy positions one by one. Several attack satellites in the orbit of the Ibero galaxy spewed flames from the sides, slowly adjusting their postures until the muzzles were aimed at the targets on the ground. The loader put solid warheads into the electromagnetic track one by one, and as the electromagnetic acceleration track was activated, the warheads were ejected like machine guns and flew towards the city on the ground. Soon hundreds of small fireballs appeared in the sky and hit the ground. The Mingze officers and soldiers in the outer defense line of the city could not help but look up at the blue sky. Finding countless fireballs flying towards them in the sky, the Mingze soldiers panicked and ran out of the bunkers. But the speed of the shells was too fast, and they hit the ground in the blink of an eye. The vibration caused by the huge explosion came along the ground, and the civilian cannon fodder who were running were shaken by the violent vibration. The temporary protective wall that originally stood outside the city was left with only huge pits, and the surrounding ground was torn into cracks. The capital of Ibero, whose fortifications had been razed, could only be at the mercy of the Imperial Consortium. All troops, attack with all your strength. Adrian glanced at the terminal in his hand, and after confirming that the enemy's fortifications and large forces had basically been disintegrated, he ordered loudly. Get out of the way. You are free. The consortium soldiers standing on the chariot shouted at the civilian cannon fodder who were in the way. Hearing this good news, the cannon fodders made way for the consortium troops and ran to both sides with cheers. The Mingze defenders, who had lost their bunkers and the heavy weapons of the main force, were no match for the consortium army. We are all Mingze people. We will not kill you if you surrender. Put down your weapons and squat. The radios on the tanks and armored vehicles kept repeating the message of persuading them to surrender. Facing the approaching tanks and armored vehicles, the Mingze soldiers wisely raised their hands and squatted aside. The Sith Empire's auxiliary army did not encounter any major resistance along the way. The Mingze defenders, who were stunned by the orbital attack, had no intention of resisting at all and surrendered to the tyranny of the auxiliary army. So far, all the cities on Ibero have fallen into the control of the Sith Empire's auxiliary army. Located in the city hall of the capital. Change the filmed promotional video and broadcast it 24 hours a day in our occupied areas. We are going to start the second round of missions, Adrian ordered the officers surrounding him. Yes, the officers turned and left. Adrian lay down on the chair in the conference hall, looking around at the luxurious decorations around him, feeling as if he was in a dream. Well, he was indeed in a dream. He never thought that life would be so wonderful. Compared with what he had experienced these days, it turned out that he was living in vain. He felt that the wisest decision he had ever made in his life was to join the conscription of the Sith Empire's auxiliary army. Now he was in charge of a 1,000,000-strong army, which he never dared to dream of. In the distant Ilfan galaxy, in the holographic imaging room of the flagship of the Imperial Assault Fleet, Mingze took a sip of tea and clapped his hands gently. He didn't expect that he had accidentally discovered such a good seedling. If he trained him well, he would become a general of the auxiliary army. Please vote. Chapter 132 The enemy's counterattack. After the detectors left in the outer periphery of the Ibero system detected the approach of the Mingze Alliance fleet, a message was sent to Ibero. Attention all recruits. The second round of training is about to begin. The goal is to hold out for 3 days under the attack of the Mingze troops. The system's voice came from the headsets of all the auxiliary soldiers. All troops, build fortifications on the spot with the help of civilian houses. Drive all residents to the rooftops to prevent the enemy from launching orbital attacks on us. Adrian gave the order after thinking calmly for a moment. The Imperial Auxiliary Army, which had fully entered the defensive stage, quickly set up blocking fortifications in various civilian houses. One by one, the civilian houses were transformed into small fortresses, and countless gun barrels stretched out from the windows that were built up. One by one, the auxiliary army stuffed the induction mines under the hovercraft and garbage bins on the roadside. Portable missile launchers were also set up on the open space, and the messy ammunition was placed dozens of meters away. This was all the experience brought by countless deaths. How long will it take for the enemy to attack? Adrian asked, looking at the night sky full of stars. The system didn't notify us. Maybe it's to train our ability to respond to emergencies. The officer next to him took off his helmet and wiped the lens. At this time, in orbit, in the flagship of the main fleet of Mingze, the general wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth. He was impulsive just now and said so many bad things about the Alliance army. If someone with ulterior motives heard it, he would definitely be blamed. Since the enemy has captured Ibero, then our brave Marines will take it back. The general touched the tentacles on his head. Notify the landing troops to prepare to land on Ibero and launch a clearing operation. The fleet will stay in orbit and maintain high alert to prevent sneak attacks by the Imperial fleet. The general patted the tentacles. Yes, the officers in the bridge answered in unison. Soon, Hundreds of transport ships separated from the fleet and hovered above major cities in the Eastern Hemisphere. Prepare to land. With the general's order, the shields of the transport ships flashed red flames and flew towards the surface of the planet. Thousands of fighter planes accompanied the transport ships and flew towards the surface of Ibero. Finally here, Adrian looked up at the dozens of fireballs burning in the sky and sighed. Everyone, prepare for battle. The enemy is coming. The defense battle officially begins. Adrian's voice was transmitted to the ears of all the soldiers of the auxiliary army through the communicator. The landing method of the Mingze Alliance is different from that of the Empire. The Empire uses orbital airdrop pods to airdrop soldiers and equipment, and then transport planes and small transport ships carry troops to land. The landing method adopted by the Mingze Alliance is to let huge transport ships equipped with anti-gravity engines fly directly into the planet. Use the huge carrying capacity of large transport ships to send a large number of troops to the battlefield at one time. The advantage of Mingze's landing method is that it can use the powerful shields of large transport ships to resist most firepower attacks and send a large number of troops to the battlefield at one time. However, once it encounters an attack from an anti-ship orbital gun, the protective effect of the transport ship's shield will be greatly reduced, and the soldiers on this transport ship will be in danger. Although the Sith Empire's landing method deploys slightly fewer troops at one time than Mingze's landing method, the cost is also much higher. But the benefits are also obvious. Even if the enemy has anti-ship orbital weapons, against these scattered orbital drop pods, a single shot can only take away hundreds of people at most. This greatly increases the success rate of the Empire's forced landing, and it can send a large number of troops into the battlefield under the enemy's fierce artillery fire. Obviously, this time the Imperial Auxiliary Army encountered the Mingze's large ship landing tactics. The Imperial Auxiliary Army, which has no heavy anti-ship weapons, can't cause any damage to the huge transport ships by relying on those portable missiles. This makes the Mingze landing force almost zero loss during this landing. This is much more difficult. Adrian frowned as he looked at the huge transport ship flying down over the city. The huge hull of the transport ship blocked the sun, and a huge shadow shrouded the city. A few minutes later, on the plain outside the city, the landing platform of the transport ship slammed heavily on the ground. The huge hull of the transport ship suddenly paused, and dozens of huge decks around it fell to the ground, and elevators on the belly of the ship began to slowly descend. Tanks and armored vehicles drove down from the decks on both sides of the transport ship, while armored Mingze Marines ran out of the elevators lowered from the belly of the ship. Soon, the assembled Mingze army marched towards the city, and soldiers trotted beside the tanks, forming a long queue. "Sir, why don't we use orbital attacks to clear the Sith Empire Army's defense line first?" an officer on the flagship asked his doubts. "The enemy has driven all the civilians to the rooftops. How can we do it? If the video of our attack on civilians spreads, we will be court-martialed." The general stood in front of the observation deck with an expressionless face, looking at the blue planet below the battleship. "The enemy will not just leave the army here. Maybe they are hiding behind a huge meteorite in the star system, quietly waiting for us to let down our guard, send out all the exploration ships. I want to keep every move of this star system under our control," the general said and walked back to his lounge. "Yes, sir." The officer saluted the general's back and turned away. A few minutes later, thousands of exploration ships, each the size of 3 fighter planes, flew in all directions of the Ibero system. The Mingze didn't know that the Imperial fleet they had carefully guarded against had already left the star system, and the army on Ibero was just cannon fodder abandoned for the big plan. On the ground, the commander of the Mingze Marine Corps, who had originally thought that the battle would result in a one-sided massacre, was a little dumbfounded. This group of Sith Empire auxiliary troops transformed countless civilian houses into small fortresses, and there were large words painted on the outside of the fortresses: "There are civilians and cameras inside." Now these Mingze soldiers were at a loss. They couldn't bomb these bunkers and small buildings, and they couldn't bypass them. If they were bombed, dozens of civilians inside would definitely be killed. You have to know that these are not civilians on a remote colony, but residents of the second largest economic planet of the Mingze Alliance. Most of the people who can live in the capital of this planet are middle-class citizens. If dozens of people died from this cannon, no one could bear the responsibility. And it is even more impossible to ignore this building and go around it. The enemies are all hiding in these buildings, and there is no enemy in the open air. Is this war not going to be fought? If they want to fight a street battle, we will fight them in a street battle. The general slammed the control console after receiving the news. Order the 031 Special Forces to prepare for battle. Take down this capital for me. It feels like Sanjiang is hopeless. It should be on the shelves in 2 weeks. I have accumulated more than 10 chapters now. It will be exciting to wait until they are all put on the shelves. Chapter 133 Launcher completed. At this time, in the Ilfan Galaxy, a squadron that had separated from the main fleet to support the new recruits of the Auxiliary Army appeared in the galaxy. The two fleets met at the edge of the Ilfan Galaxy and merged into one fleet again. Prepare to go to the Ilfan Galaxy, open up the channel with the Empire, cut the Mingze Alliance in half, and devour them one by one. Mingze stood in front of the galaxy map, looking at the occupied areas of the Empire and the Mingze Alliance, and ordered domineeringly. Yes. The fleet will enter hyperspace in 2 hours, the officer on the side said respectfully. 2 hours later, the Imperial Raid fleet disappeared in the starry sky. On the outskirts of the Waston Galaxy, accompanied by a flash of light, the Sith Empire Raid fleet appeared on the outskirts of the galaxy. Have you contacted the first and second fleets of the Empire? Mingze sat in the command chair with his hands folded across his chest. Your Majesty, we haven't contacted them yet. They have been escaping into hyperspace for more than 10 days. The fleet that escapes into hyperspace in an emergency will lose contact, forget about them, and attack the Ilfan system with all your strength. After taking this place, the strategic channel between the Empire and Emonstar will be opened. We can rely on this line to split the Mingze Alliance. Once the Ilfan system is taken, immediately send out construction ships to build a material transmission transfer station. A gleam of light flashed in Mingze's eyes. Due to the special technology of the Empire, material transmission technology, which is to decompose and transmit the material and then print it out, although this technology allows a small construction ship to build any complex building within the Empire. However, this kind of material transmission has an extremely obvious disadvantage, that is, it has a distance limit. Once it exceeds the receiving distance, the construction ship cannot print even a screw. The so-called material transmission transfer station is a special product to solve this distance limit. It is like a Wi-Fi signal repeater, which can transmit matter to farther place. If this material transfer station can be built, then the Empire can do whatever it wants on the passage from the Empire to Emonstar. At that time, the Empire can build fortresses in these star systems. The Empire, which has the building printing technology, can build such super buildings at a speed that other civilizations cannot reach. Countless Imperial warships rushed towards the space fortress under repair in the orbit of Ilfanstar, without giving the Mingze defenders any time to prepare. Dividing line. On Earth. In the Taklamakan Desert, the huge town is no longer as busy as it was a few days ago. The transport helicopters that frequently take off and land have disappeared, and the original huge material loading and unloading area has been transformed into a small green square, with only 6 landing and takeoff platforms retained. A soldier of the Sith security patrolled the town with a Gauss rifle in his hand. From time to time, patrol cars rushed out of the town and ran into the desert. There was a roar of engines, and 3 black dots appeared in the distant sky of the small town. 2 helicopters of the Sith security surrounded a long and narrow luxury helicopter in the middle and flew towards the small town. In the luxury helicopter in the middle, Luo Xianyi sat in the co-seat next to the main seat, sliding a tablet in his hand, while Wang Xiao, who was sitting in the main seat, was holding a cigar and looking at Luo Xianyi from time to time. He had long felt that this Commissioner Luo was very beautiful and wanted to transfer her to work by his side, but she had always disagreed and was often away on business trips, which made it difficult for Wang Xiao, who had left personnel management and other tasks to the intelligent brain, to start. This time, they finally had the opportunity to stay together. He must seize the opportunity and persuade Commissioner Luo to work by his side. By then, it would not be impossible for her to become the boss lady of Sith technology. Thinking of this, Wang Xiao smiled secretly. Seeing this, Luo Xianyi, who was standing by, couldn't help but roll his eyes. Why was this boss always acting silly? He really doubted how he had developed Sith technology into the behemoth it is today. Chairman, we are about to reach the Babel base, Luo Xianyi said to Wang Xiao, who was grinning. Ahem. Wang Xiao pretended to be calm and adjusted his tie to ease the embarrassment. Chairman, we're here. Look, That huge building is the communicator we built to search for extraterrestrial civilizations. Luo Xianyi pointed to the huge building reflecting a white halo in the sun in the distance and said. As the propeller rotated slower and slower, the landing gear of the helicopter gently touched the ground. A beautiful executive came forward with several fully armed Sith security soldiers, and the beautiful executive stretched out her hand to open the door of the helicopter. Hello, Chairman. I'm Su Bailing, the security manager of the Babel project. Su Bailing bowed to Wang Xiao. Well, hello. Wang Xiao's eyes lit up. This girl is also good looking. It would be perfect if she was transferred to his side. Led by Su Bailing, Wang Xiao and Luo Xianyi walked towards the control tower of the base. Chairman, a strange infectious disease is spreading in the United States recently, causing panic all over the world. Now the world's attention is focused on the new parasitic fungus that causes this infectious disease, and no one has noticed our space exploration plan. Should we find the media to publicize it? It may have a negative impact on our company in the future, Luo Xianyi asked Wang Xiao on the side. The intelligent brain concealed the true purpose of the equipment from everyone. Now everyone thinks that this is just a large life planet searcher. Wang Xiao waved his hand indifferently and said, no. We are already conspicuous enough, and we don't need to attract attention anymore. If we attract more attention, those conspirators will jump out again. Although he said so, he didn't think so in his heart. If it weren't for the intelligent brain's strong suppression, he would have wanted all the people on Earth to witness the arrival of this great moment. Until now, he still doesn't understand why he has to be so low-key. It's not something shameful. Yes, Luo Xianyi responded in a proper manner. As the sightseeing elevator in the control tower rose rapidly, Wang Xiao and his party arrived at the control room. Welcome, Chairman. Everyone in the control room stood up and applauded. Wang Xiao waved his hand with satisfaction and walked to the middle seat and sat down. In front of him was a huge floor-to-ceiling window. And outside the floor-to-ceiling window was the huge hyperspace signal transmitter. Chairman, shall we turn it on? The person in charge walked behind Wang Xiao and asked respectfully. Well, turn it on. We are about to usher in a turning point in human history. I, Wang Xiao, will bring a brand new era to mankind. Wang Xiao said this and waved his hand proudly, and everyone behind him applauded. Yes, Sith technology will surely reach a new peak under the leadership of the chairman. We are honored to be a member of Sith technology. Wang Xiao was very satisfied with the reactions of the crowd. He reached out and took a glass of red wine from the cart prepared for him. He wanted to slowly taste the wine and wait for the most exciting moment to come. As the person in charge pressed the switch on the console, a slight vibration was felt in the control room. The originally closed hyperspace signal transmitter was slowly lifted up by hundreds of huge hydraulic columns. When the transmitter was lifted to a height of 20 meters in the air, the huge transmitter opened like a petal, revealing the densely packed signal transmission towers inside. Su Bailing is just a supporting role among supporting roles. Please don't imagine her as the heroine. It's Monday, please vote. Chapter 134, Contact with the Empire. A sharp sound of electricity was heard, and the transmitter began to flash electricity. A message that was undetectable by the existing technology on Earth was sent into the boundless starry sky. In the blue brick of the Sith Star, the capital of the Empire. In an originally dark hall, a blue light suddenly broke the darkness of the hall. As the frequency of the blue light flashed higher and higher, the lights of the entire hall gradually lit up. One by one, the Earth elites who had been brainwashed for a long time were brought to a closed room by the Sith officers. After everyone sat down, a helmet like a curling iron was lowered from the ceiling and put on their heads. Read with me. The officer held up a tablet and paced back and forth in front of everyone. Long live the Empire, the officer shouted loudly. Long live the Empire, everyone shouted. The officer nodded with satisfaction and continued, I am willing to sacrifice my life for the Empire. I am willing to sacrifice my life for the Empire. Very good, continue. Long live the great Emperor of the Empire, His Majesty Li Mingze, the officer continued to shout. Long live the great Emperor of the Empire, His Majesty Li Mingze. The elites raised their right hands. Okay, you stay, and the others follow me. The officer pointed at Dennis. Dennis looked at the officer with surprise as he led the others out of the room. Suddenly, his head was covered by a black hood, and a mysterious male voice came from his ear. You are very special. The brainwashing equipment doesn't work on you. Do you still want to try to get away with it? It turned out that the hair curler empire can read the brain fluctuations of this person from it, and thus judge the effect of brainwashing. No. I didn't mean it, Dennis tried to explain anxiously. But take him away. Destroy him, the mysterious male voice said coldly. It was obviously not a very fierce voice, but it sounded like a thunderbolt in Dennis' ears. Soon Dennis felt that he was dragged off the chair and dragged to an unknown place. At the beginning, the Empire Army of Emin Star captured a total of 60 Pan-Earth Alliance Marines and 20 American Marines. They were brainwashed for a long time in the Imperial prison, but it was obvious that some of them slipped through the net. On the other side, the 19 elites who passed the test were brought into a bright hall. A platform in the center of the hall was still flashing blue light frequently. Several officers and scientists of the Sith Empire were sitting in the seats in the hall, and more than a dozen guards were surrounding them. Go in. Your seats are there, the officer in charge of leading the way pointed to the 2 rows of seats in the corner of the room. After everyone sat down, the lights in the room gradually dimmed, and a holographic projection of a planet suddenly appeared on the platform in the middle of the hall. A colonel in a white military uniform walked onto the platform and stood next to the planet projection. I am the person in charge of this special mission, by sea. As you can see, the planet next to me is the target of this mission. The natives on this planet call it Earth. The holographic projection in the hall suddenly changed, and a series of small windows appeared in the air. The windows flashed the scenery of the planet and some videos of major events. Our great emperor has issued the highest order. We must completely absorb this primitive and backward planet. At any means. At any price, the person in charge, by sea, raised his fist and waved it in the air twice. Our advanced team has established a base on this planet, called Sith Technology. Not long ago, they made a hyperspace communicator and contacted us. Now our mission is to take over this base, assimilate the entire planet in secret, and strive to take this planet without bloodshed. The next task will be assisted by comrades from Earth who are familiar with Earth affairs. After saying that, Bicey waved her hand, and the lights in the room returned to normal. Hundreds of light years away on Earth, Sith Technology's intelligent brain received an order from the Sith Empire through a hyperspace signal transmitter. Su Bailing, who was standing behind Wang Zhao, suddenly felt a vibration on her arm, and a message from the mysterious boss was transmitted to the terminal on her wrist. Su Bailing quietly turned around and walked to an unmanned corner of the control room. As she opened the message, her hand floating in the air paused. But after a moment, Su Bailing straightened her collar and stood behind Wang Zhao again. How is it? Has our searcher found a planet with life near the solar system? Wang Zhao asked the person in charge excitedly. He seemed to see himself building a colony on a new planet with the help of the intelligent brain. Chairman, we didn't find a planet with life, but we received a message, the person in charge said lightly. Oh? What message? Is it from aliens? Wang Zhao was very curious. No, the message tells us that you are already the former chairman. Before the person in charge finished speaking, Su Bailing waved to the guards around him, and then stepped forward to lock Wang Zhao's arm tightly. I'm sorry, you are no longer my boss, Su Bailing whispered in Wang Zhao's ear. What do you mean? How can I be the former chairman? This company is my sole proprietorship. Wang Zhao, who was handcuffed by Su Bailing, shouted unwillingly, and his body was still struggling. Luo Xianyi on the side was already scared. Are the security personnel of this base going to kidnap him? Commissioner Luo, right? Congratulations on your promotion. Your monthly salary will be doubled. You will receive the promotion information soon. Remember, nothing happened today, otherwise you know the consequences. Su Bailing turned to Luo Xianyi who was standing beside him and said. Luo Xianyi nodded woodenly, stretched out his hand to his mouth and made a zipper gesture, and Su Bailing nodded. Soon, Wang Zhao was escorted to the helicopter landing platform. A black helicopter specially used for escorting by Sith security had been waiting for a long time. Let me go. I will fire you. I will make you bankrupt. I am the boss of Sith Technology, Wang Zhao kept shouting before being stuffed into the helicopter, but the soldiers around him ignored him. As the helicopter took Wang Zhao to the distant sky, Su Bailing finally got through to the mysterious boss. Boss, Wang Zhao has been sent to the base of Sith security. But he has been imprisoned. What about Sith Technology? Su Bailing asked in confusion. You don't need to ask this. Wang Zhao was no longer the owner of the company when the company was injected with capital by overseas shell companies. The owners of those shell companies have been missing for many years, dead, and the new chairman of SYS Technology is you. I hope you will not live up to the trust of the Empire. The great Emperor is with you." After that, the intelligent brain of SYS Technology cut off the connection with Su Bailing. In the underground of the blue brick of SYS Star, the capital of the Empire, Tianyi's figure appeared in the main engine room. "You can only blame it on you for planning to attack this little girl named Luo Tianyi. Luo Tianyi. It's destined," Tianyi muttered to himself in the main engine room, and then disappeared in the room. Su Bailing, who had taken over Wang Zhao's position on Earth, waved his hand excitedly. "Damn Earth, damn human traitors," the Empire gave her what she had never dared to think of before. What's more, the Empire is so powerful, and daring to resist the Empire is not looking for death. Since you can't resist, you might as well enjoy it. I have saved 13 chapters, and it is estimated that it will be put on the shelf soon. It's so exciting. Brothers and sisters, vote to death on me. Chapter 135 The Disappearance of Wang Zhao. As the helicopter continued to bump up and down under the influence of the air currents between the mountains, Wang Zhao's head was shaken a little dizzy in the cabin. "Why do you treat me like this?" Wang Zhao looked at the two guards who were guarding him and asked unwillingly. "If you are willing to let me go, you can enjoy a lifetime of wealth and glory." Wang Zhao looked at the two guards with eager eyes, but they seemed not to hear and did not react. "I am very rich. As mercenaries of SYS Security, you should know my worth. As long as you let me go quietly, I will give you 10 billion, 10 billion. This is something you can't earn in several lifetimes." Wang Zhao continued to increase the chips and tempted them. He didn't believe this evil. Such a large amount of money couldn't move them. Isn't it said that people die for money and birds die for food? Oh? Is this what you mean by wealth? A guard put the tablet in front of Wang Zhao and looked at him with contempt, as if he was watching a joke. According to the latest news released by SYS Technology, the previous chairman and general manager, Mr. Wang Zhao, disappeared after boarding a plane on the 24th. Now SYS Technology has mobilized a lot of resources to find the previous chairman. At the same time, the board of directors, which already holds 99.1% of SYS Technology shares, has elected Ms. Su Bailing, the new chairman and general manager of SYS Technology. Ms. Su Bailing graduated from Harvard Business School 3 years ago and has not been married yet. At such a young age, she has become the chairman and general manager of the world's largest multinational company. I wonder what she thinks. Let's switch to the interview video sent back by a reporter. "Ms. Su Bailing, Mr. Su, do you have anything to say at this time?" A female reporter handed the microphone to Su Bailing in the video. "I am just taking over temporarily. We will continue to spare no effort to find him. We all believe that he is still alive. We at SYS Technology will continue to." Before Su Bailing in the picture finished speaking, Wang Zhao gritted his teeth and threw the tablet to the ground. "Damn it. This is a conspiracy. You are all traitors. You all covet my company," Wang Zhao shouted hysterically. Unexpectedly, a huge fist hit him. With the sound of flesh hitting flesh, Wang Zhao fainted on the seat with blood all over his face. The cabin was completely quiet. The guard who threw the fist took out the tissue in his pocket with disdain, wiped his bloody fist, sat back in his original seat and began to close his eyes and rest. Wang Zhao, who was leaning on the side, was ignored like a salted fish. Tens of minutes later, the helicopter landed on the Sith Security Headquarters building on the outskirts of the desert. Under the escort of dozens of soldiers, Wang Zhao was dragged into a secret room deep in the building. A basin of cold water was poured on Wang Zhao's head. "Where is this?" Wang Zhao, who woke up, found that his eyes were dark. He twisted his body locked in the chair uneasily. "Welcome, Wang Zhao." At this time, a face that Wang Zhao was very familiar with suddenly appeared in the dark room. "Intelligent brain? It's you. Why do you treat me like this?" Wang Zhao roared. "The moment you picked up the brain, your fate was determined. My name is Basi. On behalf of the Sith Empire, I appreciate your efforts. From now on, your value is only." Basi's voice gradually faded. "What empire? What does it mean?" Wang Zhao's eyes went dark again, and he was carried into the laboratory by two soldiers. A simple version of the memory infusion machine was placed in the laboratory. This is the latest Earth version of the memory infusion machine made by the brain using the existing materials on Earth. After receiving the memory infusion machine information from the Empire, because of the limitation of the materials, The memory infusion machine made has more side effects than the memory infusion machine used by the Empire in Plan X. After using it, the life of the experimental subject is probably only a few days. The soldier stuffed the unconscious Wang Xiao into the memory infusion machine. 3 days later, the wreckage of the plane of the former director of Sith technology was found by a rescue helicopter in a desert area rarely visited by people, which instantly attracted the attention of the world. Is the most successful post-90s in the world alive or dead? On that day, reporters from all over the world rushed to the small town next to the desert, and countless vehicles surrounded the local hospital. Soon, an ambulance escorted by several black SUVs drove into the hospital in the small town. As the wounded Wang Xiao was pushed out of the ambulance, the reporters surrounding the hospital entrance frantically pressed their cameras, flashes flashed one after another, and the medical staff had to lower their heads to walk. The next day, a piece of news shocked the world. Wang Xiao was found to be seriously injured. Although he still retained a clear consciousness, his lifespan was only 5 days at most. Knowing that he would not live long, Wang Xiao left all his shares to his lover Su Bailing, and donated his $1 billion in cash to the Sith Foundation. The Sith Foundation is a charity dedicated to caring for homeless orphans around the world. People not only regretted the passing of a young life that created the Sith miracle, but also admired his noble character. Since then, Wang Xiao's short life has come to a perfect end, and Su Bailing has legitimately become the official general manager and chairman of Sith technology. Everything went so perfectly, dividing line. On a barrow, in a dark alley, Adrian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and leaned against the wall, panting. Since the Mingze Alliance deployed special forces to the barrow, the defense line established by the Imperial Auxiliary Army was easily torn apart in a short period of time. Even Adrian, who was appointed as the supreme commander of the new auxiliary army, was forced to flee everywhere. Not only did all the guards and officers die, but he also lost contact with the main force. Adrian suddenly lowered his head, and with a whole explosion, the wall behind his head was shattered by a metal fist. Adrian, who relied on his sixth sense to avoid the attack, ran to the end of the alley. A silver humanoid machine smashed the wall of the building next to the alley and entered the alley. If Lei Ming, the captain of the death squad that landed on the Mingze space fortress, was here, he would definitely be able to recognize this humanoid machine. It was the robot soldier that forced them to call for heavy firepower. The robot's 3 green electronic eyes kept turning, and then it raised its weapon and fired bullets at Adrian. Adrian, who had been on the battlefield for a long time and had a lot of experience, rolled forward several times without any rules, dodging the bullets fired by the robot with calculated trajectories. The only thing that was wrong with the robot was that it was not flexible enough and was too rigid. Damn it! Damn it! Adrian ran wildly while yelling. He had fought with these robot soldiers many times and knew clearly that the weapons of light infantry had no effect on this kind of robot soldiers. These robot soldiers produced on a small scale for attacking should be the role of heavy armored soldiers among robots. Heavy weapons are needed to deal with heavy armored soldiers. However, this heavy armored robot did not give up on him or get angry because of Adrian's yelling. It still followed behind him slowly, as if teasing a poor little bug. "Sir, come here." An Imperial auxiliary soldier leaned out of a window and threw a dozen grenades tied together in his hand behind Adrian. Adrian's eyes twitched, and he leaped forward. A moment later, a huge explosion came from behind him. The air wave generated by the explosion blew him away, and he rolled on the ground for several rounds before he came to a stop. Su Bailing is not the heroine. She is just a supporting role among supporting roles. The reason why women are chosen to be placed on the surface is because they seem to have no offensive power. I have saved 14 chapters. Vote. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 136, Mingze's Mysterious Forces. Seeing that the heavy armored robot had its limbs cut off by the grenade beam, leaving only its body twitching on the ground, the soldier hiding in the building quickly jumped down and ran to Adrian's side. "Sir, are you okay?" The soldier dragged Adrian into the building where he was hiding. "Ahem, fortunately, it's the day of the enemy's counterattack now," Adrian asked weakly. His portable terminal had been broken in the battle. He had lost his sense of time after fleeing day and night. "It's the 4th day, sir, and there's 1 minute left to the 5th day," the soldier answered truthfully. "It's been 5 days, our mission is about to end." Adrian looked through the window at the starry sky. Although he knew that all this was simulated, he still felt a kind of mental fatigue. Beep, beep. The soldier's terminal suddenly flashed, and he hurriedly turned the information into external mode. "Congratulations to all the brave soldiers on completing the final simulation training. The fact that you have survived until now shows that you have amazing combat talents. The Empire has prepared evacuation ships for you in various regions of Abero in advance. All soldiers who can reach the evacuation ships within 3 days will pass the test. The location of the evacuation ship has been marked on your terminal." Adrian's familiar cold system voice came from the terminal. This so-called evacuation ship is completely because Mingze believes that those who can survive until now must be elites, and it is just right for them to stay as officers of the auxiliary army of the Mingze tribe in the future. So 5 transport ships were landed in advance before the fleet evacuated, and a total of 50,000 people could be evacuated. As Mingze expected, after the baptism of the Mingze secret robot army and the Marine Corps, only 80,000 of the millions of new recruits of the Empire's auxiliary army were left. The remaining 80,000 people are all soldiers with extremely high combat qualities. After 3 days of evacuation, those who can reach the evacuation ship are excellent soldiers picked from 100. This mission is not over directly, but we have to board the evacuation ship. Adrian looked up at the sky in despair. He was exhausted now. Suddenly, a violent explosion lifted the roof of the building where Adrian was, revealing the starry sky outside. A small spaceship appeared from the edge of the opened roof, and several dazzling searchlights shone from the spaceship to Adrian and the others. "Run!" the soldier shouted, pulling Adrian up and running to the window. "It must be that robot that exposed our position. We need to go underground, otherwise we can't outrun this spaceship," Adrian shouted. The two looked at each other, broke the glass and jumped out of the window onto the street. The pilot of the small spaceship seemed to believe that the two people could not escape, and was not in a hurry to fire weapons. Instead, he opened the armor on both sides of the spaceship and dropped 4 light robots that were obviously much smaller to the ground with cables. At the same time when the robot touched the ground, the cable behind the robot quickly disconnected and retracted upwards, and the robot knelt on one knee and landed steadily on the ground. Without any pause, the robot stood up after landing and chased after Adrian and his partner. Adrian, who was running, looked back at the robot that was catching up with him, and couldn't help sweating. "Do you have any more grenades?" Adrian asked the soldier beside him with a fluke. "Sir, no, I used them all up when I saved you." The soldier's answer shattered the last glimmer of hope in Adrian's heart. Without effective weapons to defeat the enemy, they could only run forward desperately. Compared with Adrian and his partner who were wearing simple power armor, the robot's speed was obviously much faster, and it caught up with Adrian and his partner in a short while. Adrian and his partner had to draw their sabers and prepare to fight with the 4 robots. At this time, the small spaceship in the air also stopped, and several searchlights shone on Adrian and his partner and the 4 robots on the ground. This made Adrian feel as if he was participating in a live fighting match on TV, but without a little applause. Adrian and the soldier rushed towards the 4 robots with sabers in hand. The soldier first swung his saber at the robot's right arm, which was raised to block, leaving a shallow mark, but the robot then knocked it back several steps with a punch of its left hand. Adrian saw the situation and changed the direction of the saber that was swinging towards the robot's arm, slashing towards the crack of the robot's elbow joint. Following the crack of the robot's joint, the saber easily cut the buried wires inside. With a burst of electric sparks, one of the robot's arms fell down weakly. Adrian cut across again and cut off several data cables at the robot's neck. The robot, which had lost its sensor, fell to the ground. The pilot of the spaceship who was watching the situation saw that the situation was not good and put away his thoughts of playing around. The remaining 3 robots, under the order of the pilot of the spaceship who saw that the situation was not good, ordered the remaining 3 robots to pull out the rifles behind them. "Danger!" The soldier who was blasted back rushed forward and pushed Adrian to the ground. Several bullets flew through the soldier's huge pile-cap head, and blood gushed out from the wound. "Sir, finish this training." The soldier, who felt that he was about to die, took off the terminal in his hand and handed it to Adrian, then stood up and rushed towards several robots. "Run!" the soldier shouted. Adrian quickly turned over and ran forward. A moment later, bursts of gunfire came from behind him. Although he wanted to stop and shoot at the robots, his reason and the spaceship with a launch bay opened above his head told him that it was unwise to do so. Moreover, he must be crazy to compete with robots and shooting skills. At the moment when the enemy was about to fire at him, Adrian smashed the window of a store on the street and dodged inside. Almost at the same time, an explosion flashed on the street where he was originally, and the huge shock wave shattered the glass of the houses on both sides of the road. Adrian, who was hiding behind the bunker, avoided the tragic fate of being shot and received by broken glass. He stood up, kicked open the back door of the store, and ran deep into the building. Huff, huff, huff. Adrian, who felt that he had escaped the pursuit, gasped heavily and put the terminal in his hand on his arm. As he maneuvered the position of the evacuation spacecraft, he found that he was still quite a distance away from this position, which made him very desperate. Suddenly thinking of something, Adrian quickly ran to the second floor of a building. Sure enough, Adrian could not be found, and the pilot of the Mingze spacecraft did not want to waste time here, and began to recover the robots on the ground. At this time, the three robots stood motionless under the spacecraft, obviously in a shutdown state, with cables hanging down to the ground, and the cables twisted themselves and plugged into the backs of the ground robots. Alice, the update is too slow, so I'm going to drop it in my collection. Otherwise, I don't want Sanjiang to take the initiative to apply for listing. Chapter 137 Mechanical Soldier Transport Ship. Adrian seized the opportunity, opened the window on the second floor, and jumped up with a running start to hang on a cable. The spaceship tilted slightly to one side, but the pilot did not notice it, thinking that the strong wind outside had disturbed the spaceship. Finding that the pilot did not notice him, Adrian quickly jumped to an empty space on the side of the spaceship, grabbed the edge with both hands, and slipped into the groove with force. This groove should be used to place the robot destroyed by Adrian. Fortunately, just like the robots built by humans, the robots made by the Mingze people also tend to be in the shape of the Mingze people, which allowed Adrian to squeeze into the groove. As the armor on both sides of the spaceship slowly closed, the spaceship roared towards the transport ship floating above the city. Calling the control center, patrol boat number 0067 requests to replenish combat robots, ammunition and fuel. This is the control center, requesting to pass. As the voice in the communicator disappeared, a closed transport ship gate slowly opened to the upper and lower sides, revealing a passage for entry and exit, and the patrol boat slowly flew into the passage. On both sides of the long and narrow passage are helipads, and behind the helipads are isolation gates. As the patrol boat landed on the helipad, the isolation gates on the back of the helipad opened to both sides, and the helipad patrol boat slid into the isolation gate along the track below. After entering the isolation gate, a sturdy mechanical arm descended from the ceiling, grabbed the patrol boat where Adrian was hiding, and moved it into the air, moving it toward the inside of the transport ship. After a while, the mechanical arm placed the patrol boat in an automatic maintenance and supply groove. Dozens of mechanical arms stretched out from the wall and quickly dismantled the outer armor of the patrol boat, revealing the magazine inside. Missiles were loaded into the magazine by the mechanical arm, and the mechanical arm responsible for installing the robot on the other side was also holding a brand new robot in waiting. The armor on both sides of the patrol boat slowly opened, and Adrian, who was hiding inside, quickly flashed out of the patrol boat. He looked at the mechanical arm in front of him, gritted his teeth, and climbed a few times. Adrian followed the mechanical arm to the top of the maintenance groove. If I were to describe his mood at this moment in one word, it would be shocking, shocking beyond words. Rows of mechanical arms carrying countless robot soldiers passed by the ceiling. Adrian looked around and found that the entire cabin of the transport ship was full of robot soldiers, suspended in the air by mechanical arms. Surprised, he had not forgotten to record these images into the terminal in his hand. This was a good habit he had developed when he was performing infiltration training before. After thinking for a moment, Adrian did not return to the patrol boat, but walked along the edge of the maintenance and supply groove towards the inside of the transport ship. Tens of minutes later, a huge flame broke out on the side of the transport ship, and a patrol boat rushed out of the damaged hole in the transport ship and flew towards the horizon. Soon, more than a dozen patrol boats also rushed out of the transport ship, following the patrol boat driven by Adrian. After leaving the Mingze transport ship, The terminal in Adrian's hand automatically connected to the evacuation ship responsible for transferring information. A signal flew in the direction of the Imperial Assault Fleet. In the Waston system, the Imperial Assault Fleet had eliminated the defenders here and officially occupied the system. The Imperial Assault Fleet, which had opened up the strategic channel Termin Star in the Empire, was docked in the orbit of Waston Star for repairs. At this time, in the orbit of Waston Star, a huge diamond-shaped space station with a diameter of several kilometers was slowly being built with the efforts of dozens of construction ships. This huge space station is the Empire's Material Transmission Transfer Station. Once this transfer station is completed, the Empire will build a wall of steel fortresses in the Empire's channel Termin Star, tearing the Mingze alliance apart. The surface of the Material Transmission Transfer Station, which has been completed by almost half, flickered with mysterious blue light patterns. One after another, maintenance spacecraft shuttled through the warships docked next to the transfer station, and from time to time, the maintenance drone spray gun attached to the warships emitted a little light. In the fleet flagship, Mingze was soaking in the bathtub in the bathroom of his room. Well, it's comfortable to relax properly. Mingze reached out and took the fruit beside him and threw it into his mouth. Your Majesty, there is an important discovery. Tianyi's figure suddenly appeared next to the bathtub. Mingze was so scared that he quickly covered his lower body. Don't always appear when I take a bath, okay? Send a message to notify me. Why cover it? It's not like I haven't seen it before. When you take off your clothes every day, the monitor in my network transmits the picture to you. Don't you see it every day when you scan it for you? Tianyi pouted humanely and disappeared. Mingze hurriedly got up and put on his bathrobe. Okay, come out, Mingze, who is dressed, shouted at the air. Tianyi's figure appeared in the bathroom again. What's the matter? Sergeant, Mingze asked curiously. Your Majesty, look at this. Tianyi waved his hand in the air, and a huge holographic screen appeared in the air. The holographic screen played the video shot by Adrian in the Mingze transport ship. Mingze looked at the various robots flashing in the video and couldn't help but crush the fruit in his hand. The Empire is still too young. At present, all scientific research forces are concentrated on space combat. There is no time and resources to develop technologies such as robot armies. But isn't there a ready-made one in front of us? As long as he takes down this fleet, the technology of combat robots will directly usher in a leap. Thinking of this, a sneer flashed across Mingze's mouth. Tianyi, order the fleet to prepare to set off. The target is a barrow. Our goal is not to occupy the planet, but to seize an enemy transport ship. Yes, Sir. Tianyi's figure disappeared in the room. The maintenance ships shuttling in the fleet seemed to have received some instructions, and turned around and flew away from the fleet. The maintenance drones working on the surface of the warships also withdrew into the cargo hold of the warships. The huge Imperial fleet slowly left the orbit of Waston, and the tail spurted out streams of flames and flew towards the edge of the star system. Demarcation line. After a few days, Adrian and many soldiers had arrived at the location marked on the terminal. As he expected, all the evacuation locations were in lakes and oceans. The Empire parked the transport ship for evacuation in the deep sea and turned off the reactor, allowing the transport ship to blend into the surrounding environment. The new recruits of the Imperial Auxiliary Army who arrived at the evacuation point followed the prompts given on the terminal and entered the evacuation spacecraft through the underground passage that was tens of kilometers long. Although the spacecraft needed to remain silent and the reactor could not be started, the auxiliary soldiers who arrived first did not riot, but spent 2 days and nights in the cold and dark, which greatly improved their willpower. Thanks to my sunny mood this week, Baozi, Stone KK, Little Book Friend, Fuki, Book Friend 140,780,70,424,477, Big Eyes Double Eyelids, Yisu, Yiliz Hao, Book Friend 08031920312600, Miri, Len Yu Xianfeng, Dutch 123, and Strong as a Joke for the rewards. Thank you for your recommendation votes. Thank you for the support of Book Friends. Chapter 138 Suicide Attack. 321 The evacuation time has come. Everyone's terminal received a system prompt. Many recruits who had not yet arrived sat on the ground in despair, staring at the 4 big red words evacuation failed on the screen in a daze. A moment later, the system prompt came from the terminal again. The last mission, the last fight, Those of you who did not successfully evacuate can pass the test by completing the last mission. Mission objective: continue to survive for 15 days under the pursuit of the Mingze army. The remaining people had no choice but to pick up their weapons and run deep into the city. At this time, in the several major evacuation points, the hatch of the transport ship slowly closed, and as the countdown ended, the reactor and engine of the transport ship started at the same time. A dull sound came from the inside of the transport ship, and all the lights in the corridors of the entire battleship were lit up, and all the terminals in the bridge were turned on. Everyone knew that the reactor of the spacecraft was started. As the data in the transport ship's brain continued to flash, the bow of the transport ship tilted upward, and the thrusters at the tail exerted force, pushing the huge and heavy body of the transport ship upward. On the ground, the originally calm lake surface suddenly boiled, and fish of all sizes swam to the shore in panic. Several Mingze civilians who secretly ran to the lake to fish were stunned by the continuous influx of fish. After a moment, the lake surface suddenly rose upward, and a huge spaceship hundreds of meters long and wide rushed out from the bottom of the water and flew towards the sky. The waves brought by the transport ship when it flew out were as high as tens of meters, whistling and sweeping towards the civilians on the shore. At this time, the Mingze fleet in orbit had scanned these 5 abnormal energy sources as early as when the thrusters of the 5 transport ships were ignited. However, the Mingze fleet, which gathered together to prevent the Imperial fleet from attacking, was too far away from any abnormal point and was completely powerless. They could only watch the 5 transport ships break through the atmosphere and fly towards the starry sky. The unwilling Mingze fleet immediately split into 5 squadrons and chased after the transport ship. However, the speed of these 5 modified transport ships was extremely fast, and they flew out of the gravity well of the planet in a short while. Emergency jump start. Empire bless us. The 5 transport ships jumped into hyperspace in the purple light and disappeared. The chasing Mingze fleet turned around and flew towards Abero with hatred. 10 days after the evacuation ship left, in a huge lake on Abero, a huge transport ship quietly stopped at the bottom of the lake. Because the startup reactor was turned off, the entire spacecraft did not even have a trace of energy fluctuations. At this time, in the secret room of the captain's room, a hibernation chamber suddenly opened upwards, and a pair of hands covered with hibernation fluid stretched out from it and clung to the sides of the hibernation chamber. Mingze took a long breath, slowly got up from the hibernation chamber, wiped his body with a towel, and put on the power armor. Mingze waved his hand to open the door of the secret room and walked towards the cockpit of the transport ship. As Mingze walked in, the lights in the transport ship's bridge gradually lit up, and several holographic display screens in the center of the bridge lit up one by one. "Welcome aboard, Captain." The cold electronic sound of the system came from the speakers. "Intelligence brain, main engine start, all thrusters ignite." Mingze sat on the captain's command seat. This transport ship did not belong to the 5 transport ships used for evacuation. It was left at the bottom of the huge lake to be used for picking up leaks. Now it is indeed time for it to appear. As Mingze's hand slid on the console, the bow of the transport ship tilted towards the lake, and the thrusters at the tail sprayed blue flames. The transport ship rushed out of the lake in the water. At this moment, the Mingze warships that were scattered all over the planet's orbit immediately discovered this huge spaceship flying out of the lake. The muzzles of the Mingze warships were immediately aimed at the spaceship. Thick red beams of light penetrated the clouds and shot down from the sky, plowing several huge gaps on the ground. However, due to the transport ship's high speed, it just dodged the attacking beam cannon. After 10 minutes of cooling and charging time, several red beams of light fell from the sky again. Mingze, who had already calculated the time, pushed the controller to the left. Several huge blue flames suddenly spurted out from the bottom of the right side of the transport ship, rolling the transport ship to the left. However, this time the goddess of luck did not visit Mingze again. A huge opening was melted by a beam of light in the huge transport ship. Fortunately, the damaged part was only a downward thruster and a cargo hold without cargo. The transport ship did not explode or lose its ability to move because of the gap. However, the lack of a thruster still caused the transport ship's body to tilt slightly to the lower right. At this time, Mingze's expression did not fluctuate at all. He continued to calmly control the transport ship and flew towards the city where the transport ship full of robots was found. Tens of kilometers away, Mingze found the transport ship with a small hole blown open. "Goodbye, Li Mingze muttered to himself and turned the transport ship's thruster power to the maximum. Alarm! Alarm! The thrusters are seriously overloaded. All thrusters will be damaged in 5 minutes. The probability of the spacecraft crashing is as high as 61.4%. The shrill alarm sounded, and the lights in the bridge turned red. Ignore the alarm. All such alarms will not be reported, Li Mingze frowned. As the transport ship heard a series of harsh metal twisting sounds, the speed of the transport ship increased. Soon, the thrusters at the rear of the transport ship began to emit black smoke, and the entire transport ship was like a missile. The two transport ships began to twist rapidly from the collision point. The hard keel of the spacecraft could not withstand such a great force. The armor on the entire spacecraft began to shatter and fall downwards. At the same time, a violent collision sound spread outward from the collision point. All the glass in the entire city quickly shattered with the collision point of the spacecraft as the center. The sky full of glass fragments covered the entire city. The two transport ships kissed each other and fell in the opposite direction of Li Mingze. The huge ship smashed the tall buildings in the city into pieces. The Mingze soldiers and the new recruits of the Imperial Auxiliary Army who were hiding in the buildings had no time to react, and they were smashed into pieces along with the buildings they were hiding in by the rushing transport ships. The two huge transport ships left a huge impact mark hundreds of meters wide in the city along the way. Wherever the impact occurred, the tall buildings were destroyed, leaving only rubble on the ground. The sky-high flames enveloped the entire city, illuminating the two transport ships that had been inserted into the ground. The reason why Li Mingze drove the transport ship to commit suicide was that he was afraid that the Mingze alliance would find out that the situation was not right and let these secret forces retreat first. Thanks to Saber Knight for the reward of 10,000 starting coins. This is the first helmsman of this book. One more chapter. Chapter 139 Main Force versus Main Force. There was a sound of metal tearing. Li Mingze reached out and lifted the metal plate in front of him, and walked to the control console of the transport ship. Check the damage to the hull. Checking, please wait. The holographic screen, which seemed to be damaged by the collision, kept flashing. Check completed. The integrity of the hull is 41.2%, the reactor is damaged by 11/12, and the thrusters are all damaged. Scarlet information appeared on the holographic screen. How many repair drones are left? Li Mingze frowned. There are 251 repair drones left. Do you want to start repairing this ship? A confirmation dialog box appeared on the screen. Give up the repair of this ship, send all repair drones to the transport ship we hit, and scan everything that can be scanned. Li Mingze shook his head and ordered. Yes, Your Majesty. Hundreds of drones took off from the gap in the deformed transport ship and flew towards the Mingze transport ship not far away. Looking at the information of the Mingze transport ship that was constantly transmitted back on the screen, Li Mingze smiled, stood up and walked out of the transport ship. At this time, the Mingze defenders had already reacted, and countless patrol ships and fighter planes rushed to the site where the two transport ships crashed. One after another, landing ships also fell from the sky from the orbit and flew towards the Imperial transport ships. Li Mingze climbed out of the wreckage of the transport ship and stood on the large deck of the transport ship. Looking at the Mingze troops who had surrounded them below, he smiled softly. This smile made the Mingze soldiers on the ground feel creepy. They didn't know why he could still laugh in this situation, but soon they saw the Imperial man looking up at the starry sky. Looking at the boundless starry sky, Li Mingze stretched out his hand to check the time. It was almost time. Then he waved to the people on the ground, took out the pistol at his waist, and shot himself in the shocked and puzzled eyes of the Mingze army. After Li Mingze shot himself, a huge fleet jumped out of hyperspace at the edge of a barrow. In the captain's room of the fleet's flagship, a hibernation chamber suddenly opened, and Li Mingze sat up from it. Although the Advent substitutes have no pain nerves, this kind of suicide by swallowing a gun is still very exciting, making him unable to stop. The reason why he drove the transport ship to hit the transport ship of Mingze was that he was afraid that the Mingze alliance would find out that the situation was not good after discovering the Imperial raid fleet, and let these transport ships carrying secret troops retreat first. Now at least one sample can be guaranteed to be left behind, and at this time the maintenance drone is still constantly obtaining information in the Mingze transport ship. The Mingze fleet, which knew nothing about Li Mingze's plan, set its sights on the huge fleet that suddenly appeared in the star system. A few minutes ago, when the Imperial fleet appeared, The alarms on the ships of the Mingze fleet sounded miserably. The Mingze fleet did not expect that the Sith Empire army, which should have retreated for defense, would actually kill a surprise attack. And it was such a small fleet. Are they crazy? You know, their current fleet strength is much greater than the Imperial fleet. How dare the Empire take the initiative to run back and be beaten? The Mingze warships that received the assembly order started their engines and rushed to the rendezvous point from all over Abero. Some of the Marines on the ground also began to enter the city's underground bunkers to prevent being affected by stray bullets from space battles. The transport ships that were already full of Marines also took off and flew towards the Mingze fleet. Perhaps they believed too much in the strength of their fleet. These transport ships were just following the large fleet and had no intention of hiding. In the bridge of the flagship of the Imperial Assault Fleet, the huge holographic screen in the middle of the bridge showed a scan of the current star system. Your Majesty, we will meet the Mingze main fleet in 37 hours, an officer turned around and reported to Mingze on the command seat. The fleet will disperse in 30 hours and enter the battle formation in advance. After that, Mingze took a sip of the red wine in his hand and closed his eyes comfortably. His lazy look really didn't look like the expression that he should have when a big battle was about to happen. Excuse me, Your Majesty, but the enemy's military strength is much higher than ours, an officer mustered up his courage and said as he looked at the Mingze fleet on the screen, which was obviously much larger than the Imperial fleet. Are you worried that we will lose the battle? Mingze put down his wine glass and glared at the officer. No. How could our empire be defeated under your leadership? Ahem, I just feel a little uneasy, the officer explained in a panic. You are good at talking. Come out. After that, Mingze clapped his hands. 5 singers in tights walked out from the open door of the bridge. Your Majesty. The officer still didn't understand. He knew the singers, a wandering race that took the initiative to vassalize some time ago, but what did they have to do with the outcome of the war? You will know in a while. You only need to know that the enemy will never win this battle. Mingze waved his hand, and the 5 singers bowed and retreated. It's not that Mingze intends to use the people of the singer civilization as disposable items. He is not cruel enough to that extent. However, he combined the Empire's unique special technology with the special abilities of these singers. First, he cloned a singer with complete organs using cloning technology, and then let the recruited singers use the consciousness transmitter to enter his clone. In this way, this special ability can be used as a common skill. Just kill one body and replace it with another. Although the feeling of having the body sucked dry after using this special ability is very painful, for a civilization that actively vassals is unwilling to make such a small sacrifice, what's the use of them? If this special organ stimulation method was not only possessed by the people of the singer civilization, Mingze would have replaced it with the Sith people. The Mingze fleet will enter our range in 20 minutes, a day later. The calm of the flagship bridge was broken by the report. Mingze, who was taking a nap, got up and walked out of the captain's room and sat on his command seat. All warship weapons are charged, and fighters and missiles are released, Mingze said in a deep voice. Hundreds of thousands of missiles from the dispersed fleet flew towards the distant Mingze fleet, followed by thousands of fighters. After the main guns finish firing, penetrate the enemy's wings. It's time to let them know what a surprise is. Mingze showed a sneer on his face. After receiving the order, the Imperial fleet split into 2 groups and flew towards the 2 sides of the Mingze fleet. The beam gun muzzles on the ships began to glow red. Thousands of red beams of light shot towards the Mingze fleet, turning the warships in the Mingze fleet that had no time to dodge into a huge ball of fireworks in space. It's time, get ready to start. Mingze turned his head and ordered the 5 singers behind him. Yes, Your Majesty. The 5 singers responded in unison. It will be on the shelf soon, either next week or the week after next. Hey, next week we'll resume 2 updates, and the ones that are owed will be posted together. Please vote. Chapter 140 Unlimited Overclocking. Then one of the 5 singers walked out, took out a helmet from a storage box and stood in the center of the bridge hall. However, this time he did not kneel like the faceless goddess Milky, but sat cross-legged on the ground. As he put the helmet on his head, golden rays of light floated from the main engine in the center of the bridge to his helmet. As he slowly opened his mouth, the beautiful melody of the singer's chanting sounded in all the warships of the assault fleet. The pupils and whites of the eyes of each warship crew member were gradually replaced by silver light, and the brain utilization rate of these crew members was constantly increasing 100%, 200%, 300%, 400%, 500%. A large amount of energy was supplied to the brain by the body, and the crew members suddenly felt that their thinking became light and agile, and the things that were originally incomprehensible suddenly became clear, and the surrounding space also became clear. They felt that the time around them seemed to be slowed down several times, and their movements were like slow motion in a movie. The code that originally flashed quickly was also captured, and the speed of instant judgment was rapidly increasing. Specific frequencies are affecting the AI core, special containers are detected and are being accessed, core computing efficiency is increasing. Overclocked 110%, aiming accuracy has increased, and the computing code has been optimized. The Imperial warships that were sailing at high speed suddenly became more flexible, moving freely in the rain of bullets fired by the Mingze fleet. The beam cannons also became more accurate, and beams hit the Mingze Alliance warships that were dodging irregularly, turning them into balls of fire. The original numerical advantage of the Mingze Alliance fleet was quickly offset, and countless warships turned into piles of space debris under the Imperial artillery fire. But suddenly all the Imperial warships paused, no longer as flexible as before, and the aiming of the beam cannons was not as accurate as before. This made the commander of the Mingze fleet very happy. It seems that this ability is the same as the ability used by the first and second combined fleets of the Sith Empire in the Battle of Waston Star. They only have a short burst time and will return to their original state after the time is over. Fire! Fire! The enemy can't burst out anymore, kill them! Commander Mingze picked up the communicator and shouted. The Mingze fleet, which had been beaten and fled, regained its confidence and fiercely fought back against the Imperial fleets on both sides. At this time, inside the bridge of the Imperial flagship, the body of the singer who used special abilities shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye, and soon turned into a shrunken corpse. The originally upright body slowly collapsed, and the helmet on the top of the head also lost its original electric light and became dim. 3 soldiers on the side stepped forward quickly. One of them took off the helmet on the singer's head, wiped it clean with disinfectant and put it aside. The other 2 soldiers carried the shrunken body to the outside of the bridge, and one lifted it up and threw it into a huge trash can. All warship crew members, inject energy replenishment injections immediately. Restore body energy. Mingze picked up the communicator and ordered. The exhausted crew members pressed the button on their arms, and one of the injections on the back of the power armor fell down. Then the crew members felt a slight pain in their backs, and the energy replenishment injection was injected into the crew members through the power armor. The originally depressed crew members became energetic again. Inside the bridge of the Empire flagship continue. Next one, Mingze ordered the remaining 4 again. One of the 4 walked out again, picked up the helmet that had been wiped aside and put it on his head, walked to the center of the bridge and sat down, and golden streams of light drifted from the main engine again. The warship that had just lost its flexibility and accuracy suddenly paused, and its combat power soared again like chicken blood. The hull floated again like a ghost, and the beam cannon seemed to have eyes, and every bullet hit the target. The commander of the Mingze fleet, who was originally happy, was dumbfounded. What the hell is this? Isn't this ability only usable for a short time? Otherwise, the combined fleet of the Sith Empire would not have made an emergency jump to escape in the Battle of Waston Star. What is the situation now? Can this burst state be used repeatedly? All warships, hold on. The enemy's explosive state will not last long. We can fight back fiercely after this period. The commander of the Mingze fleet picked up the communicator and shouted viciously. He didn't believe this evil. Could this ability be used unlimitedly? 30 minutes later, the speed of the Sith Empire fleet dropped again, and the accuracy of the artillery fire also dropped rapidly. Haha, I knew it. I don't believe that this damn Imperial fleet can continue to explode. The commander of the Mingze fleet laughed and threw himself on the command chair. At this time, in the bridge of the Sith Empire flagship, as just now, the singer who used the ability shrank again. The soldiers on the side walked up quickly, carried the body out, and wiped the helmet clean with disinfectant. Mingze on the side was leisurely tasting red wine, not affected by the mummy at all. He held up a glass of wine in his left hand and took a sip of red wine. His eyes narrowed slightly as if he was savoring the aroma of the wine. With his other hand, he picked up a freshly made burrito. The burrito, made of various rare ingredients, exuded a fragrance that made the officers in the bridge swallow their saliva and secretly decide to have a good meal after the battle. All crew members, inject energy injections. The next person is ready. Mingze took a bite of the burrito and chewed it carefully before slowly ordering. The second injection on the back of the soldier's power armor on each warship also slowly fell, injecting the energy supplement liquid inside into the soldiers' bodies. In the flagship bridge, one of the remaining 3 singers walked out again, picked up the helmet and walked to the center of the bridge to sit down. Your Majesty, there are only 3 people left. Can you hold on to the end of this war? An officer asked cautiously. Mingze, who was eating a burrito, rolled his eyes. Who told you that there are only 3 people? As soon as the voice fell, the isolation door of the bridge opened to both sides, and another singer walked in and stood in the team of the remaining 2. The officer pointed at the new singers with a stammer. They are all substitutes for the Advent. Of course, we can bring as many clones as we want. There are still hundreds of them in the warehouse at the back. As long as the real people on the Sith Star don't die, we can keep using them. Mingze ate the burrito in his hand proudly. Your Majesty, then, won't they be dissatisfied? The officer glanced at the 3 singers standing upright and asked in confusion. Dissatisfied? How could it be? They didn't really sacrifice their lives, not to mention that the Empire pays them high salaries, and they enjoy the treatment of school-level officers. Ha. Mingze waved his hand after he finished speaking, and a maid who had been waiting for a long time handed a plate of dessert to Mingze with both hands. The officer who got the answer turned around and looked at the holographic screen intently, while Mingze behind him continued to immerse himself in the food. He had no interest in this kind of battle where the outcome could be determined. Ahem, forgot to post it. Chapter 141, Ship Seizure Battle. What's going on? Why can this kind of burst mode be used continuously? The commander of the Mingze, who was sitting on the command seat, widened his eyes. The sluggish Imperial fleet once again burst out like chicken blood, beating the Mingze fleet without any chance to fight back. At this time, the Mingze fleet, which was busy dealing with the fierce attack of the Imperial fleet, did not notice that the Imperial fleet flying over their wings was getting closer and closer to the transport fleet behind them. Landing ships, rush up and forcefully land on the enemy's transport ships. As the order was issued, the tail of the landing ship following the Imperial fleet suddenly sprayed blue flames and accelerated towards the Mingze transport fleet. The Mingze transport fleet wanted to turn around and escape, but it was too late. The speed of the spacecraft turning around was too slow, and the landing ship of the Sith Empire flew into the Mingze transport fleet in the blink of an eye. The shield-breaking weapons on the landing ships kept spewing anger at the transport ships on both sides. After more than 10 minutes, the shields of the Mingze transport ships could not bear the burden and shattered into a patch of light. The atmosphere in the Imperial landing ship was a bit dull. Boys, you are about to face your first ship-grabbing landing battle in reality. Are you nervous? Ackerman said loudly to the airborne troops in the cabin. Don't be nervous, everyone shouted in unison, but from their tense facial expressions, it can be seen that they are still a little nervous. Everyone check your equipment again. We may set off at any time. Ackerman reached out and buckled his seat belt. Many soldiers buckled their seat belts and began to check their weapons and power armor. Beep, beep. With the sound of the alarm, the lights in the landing chamber turned red. At this time, from the top of the transport fleet, it can be seen that rows of cylindrical landing chambers shot out from both sides of the Imperial landing ship and flew towards the Mingze transport ships on both sides. With a violent vibration, the cylindrical landing chamber pierced the outer armor of the Mingze transport ship fiercely, and the magnetic suction cup at the bottom of the landing chamber firmly attached the landing chamber to the outer shell of the transport ship. With a flash of red light, a small hole was melted on the wall of the outer corridor of the transport ship. As the red light in the small hole moved, a huge circle was melted on the inner wall of the transport ship. A crash was heard, and the heavy outer armor and inner bulkhead of the spacecraft were pushed into the corridor by the hydraulic rods in the landing chamber. After rolling several times, they hit the wall inside the corridor. Go, go, go! Ackerman untied his seatbelt and shouted, leading the way out. When he rushed to the hatch, he threw himself forward, rolled forward after landing, and knelt on one knee, holding a Gauss rifle and vigilantly scanning the surroundings. This exit posture can effectively prevent the enemy from concentrated fire at the hatch, and it is not for showing off. Safe. With Ackerman's wave of his hand, dozens of orbital airborne soldiers filed out of the landing chamber. At this time, in the bridge of the Mingze transport ship, The captain looked at the Imperial soldiers who were landing on the spaceship on the screen and sneered. "Start all robots and have them clear all invaders on the ship." "Yes." The soldier on the side turned on the switch on the console, and all the robots on the transport ship started instantly. In the huge warehouse of the transport ship, rows of robot soldiers hanging above the cabin were slowly lowered. The robot's originally dead sensor suddenly lit up green light, and the stiff body slowly stretched out. The activated robots took out rifles from the grooves on the ground and walked towards the exits in a neat long line. At this time, the ship-seizing team led by Ackerman was still working hard in front of a closed door, unaware that danger was approaching. A soldier's laser cutter was cutting a circle on the isolation door. Just when he was about to finish, the hatch in front of him suddenly opened to both sides, and everyone rolled back and hid aside reflexively. The experience gained from long-term combat saved their lives again. After opening the door, dozens of metal streams shot out, turning the floor where the soldiers were originally located into a honeycomb. "It's the robot army of Mingze." Everyone switched to electromagnetic weapons. Ackerman leaned back into the bunker and shouted. Upon hearing this, the airborne soldiers split the barrels of their rifles in half, pulled out a long strip from their waists and stuffed it into the separated barrels. As the parts were inserted, the muzzles of the rifles began to emit a little blue light. This was the magnetic storm kit that the Empire urgently produced to deal with the robot soldiers. Although the performance of this batch of weapons was not perfect due to the urgency of time, it was enough for the small-scale boarding battle that only took place in the spacecraft. With Ackerman's wave of his hand, the soldiers raised their weapons and pulled the trigger at the robots in the corridor. Dozens of arcs jumped and flew towards the robots. After being hit by the arcs, more than a dozen robots in front of the team began to tremble all over, and soon collapsed to the ground with smoke. Just when everyone thought they could easily get rid of these robot soldiers, a scene that shocked everyone. The robot behind inserted the rifle in his hand into his back, popped out two alloy knives with his hands, squatted forward slightly, and exerted force on his four mechanical legs, rushing towards everyone. The speed was too fast. The speed of these robots was no slower than that of the soldiers equipped with power armor, and there was no sense of sluggishness. In the blink of an eye, they rushed to the front of everyone. At this time, the electromagnetic rifles of the people were just charged. Looking at the robots that were already in front of them, everyone pulled the trigger, and electric currents jumped in the robots. The rushing robot was hit by the current in midair, and fell from the air with green smoke, sliding to the back of the soldiers. But there were still a large number of robots in front of them who were not afraid of death. It was obviously too late to recharge at this time. The soldiers finally discovered the disadvantage of this electromagnetic weapon, that is, the charging time is too long. And on the ever-changing battlefield, this will be a fatal disadvantage. This time determines the life and death of the soldiers. While the weapons of the Imperial soldiers were cooling down and charging, the second wave of robots pressed forward. As the robots ran in front of the crowd, before the Imperial soldiers could completely pull out the sabers at their waists, alloy knives stabbed into the seam of a soldier's neck. The slender metal blade covered in blood stretched out from the soldier's back, and the soldier fell to the ground with a stream of blood gushing out of his mouth. The other robots also inserted the metal blades in their hands into the bodies of several soldiers in the front row of the team. "Retreat, take turns to cover." Ackerman pulled out the pistol from his waist and fired several bursts, blowing up the heads of the robots that rushed in front of him. Many soldiers obeyed the order and ran back, leaving the soldiers behind with gritted teeth and resolutely pulled out grenades from their waists, ready to let these metal shells be buried with them even if they died. The first update of the 2 chapters has been resumed, and the 20 chapters ode will be posted together when they are released. Chapter 142, Killing Each Other. A few minutes later, there was an explosion, and Ackerman knew that his team members had perished together with the robot soldiers. Suppressing the grief in his heart, Ackerman and the remaining few people ran all the way, passing through corridors. Ackerman's body, which was highly tense due to tension, relaxed a little when he realized that there were no pursuers. However, his mood was extremely heavy at this time. Not only did the mission not complete this time, but the team he led had also been killed on the way of retreat. Where is this? Ackerman calmed down and found that he had lost his way and had lost contact with other landing teams on the spacecraft. What he didn't know was that all the landing teams had been killed at this time, and the Empire's ship-seizing war had failed completely. The airborne troops entering the transport ship encountered a robot army that was dozens of times larger than their own. Before they could raid the control room, they were wiped out on the way. At this time, the mission of the Imperial fleet also changed from seizing control of the transport ship to destroying these Mbechi transport ships. Under the fierce artillery attack of the Imperial fleet, the Mbechi transport ships were powerless. However, as the transport fleet left the gravity well of a barrow, the wounded Mbek transport ships jumped into hyperspace urgently. Just as the transport ship Ackerman was about to jump out of hyperspace, Ackerman came to a heavily blocked door. Ackerman didn't know that all the robot soldiers on the ship were rushing towards his current location. He walked slowly to the door. A few minutes later, a gap was melted in the door, and Ackerman crawled in through the gap. This is a huge room similar to a laboratory. The room is empty except for a huge host-like thing in the middle. Spacecraft Fire Control Host. Ackerman read the text translated by the power armor terminal with some curiosity. Whatever host it is, Ackerman inserted the electromagnetic rifle in his hand into the host interface and gently pulled the trigger. A dazzling electric light flew out of the rifle and drilled into the host. The fire host made a hissing sound. After a while, lines of garbled code that even the power armor could not translate began to appear on the mainframe screen. At this time, a shrill alarm sounded in the reactor room of the transport ship. Before the staff could react, the reactor was forced to shut down, and a large amount of milky white flame retardant was sprayed from the ceiling. The hyperspace generator that was originally accumulating energy to open the hyperspace suddenly stopped, and the instrument representing the energy value quickly returned to zero, and the half-opened hyperspace closed instantly. The entire transport ship fell into chaos. The fire-extinguishing windows in the corridor of the transport ship opened one after another, sucking out the air in the corridor, and the robots near the windows were sucked to the windows and piled together. Everyone in the control room of the transport ship was also confused by the flame retardant that suddenly fell from the ceiling, and the soldiers responsible for controlling the robots accidentally touched some buttons on the screen. The bodies of the robots that were not sucked away suddenly paused, turned their eyes to the robots around them, and the alloy blades in their hands popped out. Soon, the robot soldiers in the entire transport ship tore each other apart, and Ackerman, who did all this, had no idea about it. After walking around the room and feeling that there was nothing left to destroy, Ackerman climbed out of the gap when he entered. Huh? What is this? Ackerman looked down at the white liquid on the floor of the corridor. Stepping on the white liquid on the floor, Ackerman came to the corridor outside the transport ship and saw a scene that puzzled him. Robots on the ground fell to the ground with alloy blades stuck in their chests, and some robots were piled up and fell outside the corridor. Ackerman walked around the robots on the ground with a puzzled look on his face and continued to move forward. A robot that was not completely dead crawled towards him and was shot in the head by Ackerman. What's going on? Are the robots in chaos? Ackerman muttered to himself, and took out his gun again to kill a disabled robot soldier who wanted to stab him with an alloy sword. This is the landing ship command center. Ackerman, can you read it? A communication from the command center suddenly came from Ackerman's communicator. This is Ackerman. I can read it. Captain Ackerman, congratulations on your successful single-handed capture of an Mbechi transport ship. In view of your great contribution to the Empire, you have been promoted from second lieutenant to captain. The control center and the communicator sent Ackerman a piece of great news that he couldn't believe. Thank you, His Majesty the Emperor. Long live the Empire. Long live the Emperor. Ackerman was a little incoherent with excitement. This was simply a magical turn. He originally had no hope of returning alive, but now he could not only return alive, but also made such a great contribution without knowing it. Please leave the outer wall of the transport ship. Ackerman hurriedly dodged from the outside of the corridor. After a while, dozens of dull collisions came from outside the hull. Several red spots of light flashed on the outer wall of the transport ship's corridor. Soon these spots of light cut the armor of the transport ship, and the hydraulic push rod of the landing cabin pushed the cut metal plates into the corridor. Ackerman carefully avoided several flying metal plates and then turned to meet them. Hundreds of airborne soldiers poured out of the landing chamber and ran towards the transport ship. Two officers walked out of one of the landing chambers, one of whom was Ackerman's former superior. He wanted to salute reflexively, but was stopped by the superior. Captain Ackerman, there is no need to salute. You and I are officers of the same rank now. Ackerman's old superior took his hand and said affectionately. No, it's all luck. Thanks to your support, sir, Ackerman still said politely in a respectful tone. Mingze, who was disguised as an ordinary officer, couldn't stand it anymore and coughed loudly twice. Embarrassed to find that there were other people here, the two let go of each other's hands, and Ackerman touched his nose embarrassedly. Li Mingze stepped forward and patted him on the shoulder and said, "You did a great job. You and Monica have brought honor to your people. The Empire didn't misjudge you." Ackerman, who was praised, touched his nose again in embarrassment, and his light blue skin turned a little pink. Li Mingze laughed and strode into the transport ship. Li Mingze picked up a scrapped robot and said in a tut-tut manner. He didn't know what these people were thinking. They had to make robots look like humans, as if they couldn't be robot soldiers if they didn't look like their race. Li Mingze, who didn't have any major discoveries, threw the robot on the ground and continued to walk inside on the white flame retardant on the floor. At this time, a row of Mingze soldiers who were under guard came forward, and several Imperial airborne soldiers walked on the left and right of the team with guns. Just as these people passed by, a man dressed like a captain glared at Li Mingze fiercely and spat on the ground. "Empire's trash, sooner or later we will take revenge." Li Mingze frowned and waved his hand in the air, and many soldiers moved aside. "Go outside the door." After saying that, Li Mingze waited until everyone retreated to the doors on both sides of the corridor and pressed the button to close the door. "Sir," a soldier wanted to say something, but stopped talking after seeing Li Mingze wave his hand. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 143 Disadvantages of the Mechanical Legion. After the hatches on both sides were closed, Li Mingze turned around and looked at the Mingze soldiers and officers who were tied together and had their power armor removed. "You are still so rampant after being captured. I am very sorry. I wanted to spare your lives, but now I have changed my mind," Li Mingze said as he activated the magnetic adsorption device on the power armor. "What do you want to do?" "We demand normal treatment for prisoners. Killing prisoners is immoral." The voice translated by the power armor terminal came from Li Mingze's communicator. "I won't kill you. I just want you to enjoy the beautiful Milky Way." After that, Li Mingze pressed an emergency fire button on the wall of the corridor. An alloy window on the outside of the corridor suddenly opened, exhausting the air in the closed corridor. Several Mingze soldiers and officers did not expect that the double fire protection carefully designed by their country would actually cost them their lives. The Mingze soldiers tied in a row screamed and were sucked into space along with the air. As the air became thinner, their screams became smaller and smaller until they disappeared completely. The alloy window used to exhaust air slowly closed, and fresh air was replenished from the exhaust holes on the ceiling. "I'm fine, a 3-day trip to space," Li Mingze sneered, and then opened the closed isolation doors on both sides of the corridor. After the isolation door of the corridor was opened, everyone looked at the corridor where only Li Mingze was left with a dull look. Ackerman and the old boss looked at Li Mingze in confusion. "It's okay, they are useless, send them home." Li Mingze clapped his hands and walked towards Ackerman and others. Ackerman and the old boss turned around and continued to walk into the spacecraft with black lines on their heads. Who made this officer a Sith? Even if the rank was the same, they didn't dare to act rashly. Soon after, Li Mingze and others came to the core of the transport ship, the robot maintenance and construction factory. I saw that this huge cabin was full of production lines. The parts of the robots were sent to the conveyor belt by the mechanical arms, and then assembled into robots by other mechanical arms. The assembled robots were then lifted by the crane and sent to the warehouse. This manufacturing technology is very backward. Don't they have the technology to print directly? Li Mingze frowned as he walked to the warehouse where the robot parts were neatly stacked. "Your Majesty, this technology to print equipment directly is currently known to be only possessed by our empire. Other known civilizations still use normal mechanical processing to manufacture. Maybe the cost of their printing technology is too high, or for some other reason." Li Mingze received Tianyi's explanation through the smart chip in his brain. Li Mingze nodded imperceptibly and continued to walk inside. "Oh? Such an old computing chip? Obviously, ordinary mobile phones in the Mingze Alliance are more advanced than this. This is simply the technology on Earth." Li Mingze found something that made him even more curious. "Your Majesty, for combat robots, chips of this technical level are enough for robots to work, and its manufacturing cost is extremely low. It can be equipped on a large scale in robots that are like cannon fodder. Moreover, this chip can effectively prevent the birth of artificial intelligence life. Because this backward computing method and circuit cannot support the thinking and calculation of artificial intelligence life at all, Tianyi continued to explain in Li Mingze's mind. Yes, the scientists of the Mingze Alliance look smart, Li Mingze said with appreciation. Tianyi, who was in the blue brick basement of the Sith Star, couldn't help but roll his eyes. After this battle is over, we will immediately send scientists and researchers to study these robots. We need to supplement the missing technology tree, Li Mingze said to Tianyi in his mind through the intelligent chip in his brain. Your Majesty, I have a question. Tianyi's puzzled voice came from Li Mingze's mind. Ask. Li Mingze stopped and pretended to observe a robot part. Your Majesty, didn't I calculate the cost of building a robot army and inform you? The cost of building this kind of robot is 30% higher than the cost of the power armor and various weapons we equip the airborne army with. You know, we only need to pay the cost of food to recruit the orbital airborne army. In comparison, Parker and the Mingze orbital airborne army, who have the ability to think, are cheaper. Why do we still have to spend so much effort to study and manufacture robot troops? Tianyi asked curiously. Although robots are not as good and cheap as orbital airborne troops, we can use them when we encounter some special species, such as the ancient parasitic fungi that are raging on the Earth, Li Mingze said, stroking the smooth head parts of a robot. Okay, I understand. I will ask the research center to allocate some scientists and researchers to study robot technology. Tianyi's voice disappeared in Li Mingze's mind. Let's go back. Li Mingze withdrew his hand from the parts. Okay, Ackerman nodded after looking around and finding nothing missing. Not long after, in the flagship of the Imperial fleet, Li Mingze switched his consciousness back to the clone in the flagship. Li Mingze, who had reawakened, put on his power armor and walked towards the bridge. In the corridor leading to the bridge, two soldiers pushed a trash can full of corpses towards him. Long live His Majesty, the two soldiers stopped and saluted. How many clones have been used? Li Mingze asked, glancing at the trash can full of mummies. Reporting to Your Majesty, 7 cloned bodies have been used up. A soldier showed Li Mingze the recording board on the terminal in his hand. Li Mingze nodded and continued to walk towards the bridge. In the noisy bridge, a singer was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the bridge, and many officers who were already used to it were busy. No need to salute. Continue working. The soldiers and officers were about to stand up and salute when Li Mingze waved his hand to stop them. Turning around and sitting on the command seat, Li Mingze waved his hand to summon the holographic screen. Show the current battlefield hologram. As soon as the voice fell, a huge star system hologram appeared in front of Li Mingze, representing the green of the Empire and the red light spots of the enemy flashing on the hologram. Li Mingze stretched and enlarged the picture to be able to see the appearance of the two ships clearly. At this time, it can be seen that the fleet of the Sith Empire has surrounded the fleet of Mingze in the middle. The warships of the Empire are spinning wildly around the fleet of Mingze, and red beams of light are shooting into the encirclement. Chapter 144 The bad ending of the final battle. The Mingze warships in the encirclement were squeezed together, and even the warships in the middle could not find a good shooting angle, and were often blocked by their own warships. Don't continue to compress the enemy's range of activities, leave room for activities, and make full use of our advantages in dodging and shooting accuracy. Although the situation was very good, Li Mingze was still not very satisfied with the command of this temporary commander. The Imperial fleet, which was gradually compressing the Mingze fleet space for activities, stopped approaching and slowly spread outward. Originally, as the Imperial fleet's encirclement tightened, the Imperial fleet's advantages in flexibility and accuracy gradually decreased, and the commander of the Mingze fleet was secretly happy. But now the Imperial fleet is spreading outward again, making the advantages stand out again, which makes the commander of the Mingze frown deeply. No, we can't go on like this. We must break out and counter-encircle the Imperial fleet. The commander of the Mingze patted the armrest of the command seat. Prepare to break out. The Mingze fleet received the order and gathered in the middle intercone shape, aiming at the weakest defense of the encirclement. The rear thruster of the Mingze warship at the top of the cone suddenly increased its power, and the warship flew forward quickly. Alert! Alert! The enemy ship is about to collide with our ship. Please evade quickly. The voice of the ship-borne AI came from an Imperial warship in the encirclement. Through the holographic screen, everyone in the bridge can clearly see that the enemy's spaceship is heading in front of their own warship, where the Imperial spaceship is about to pass. The pilot of the warship pushed the push rod on the console to the top, and the whole warship made a sound of metal distortion and looked up to avoid it. But it was obviously too late. The huge cruiser used by the Mingze Alliance to open the way crashed under the petite body of the Imperial destroyer, and the huge force directly knocked out a terrifying gap in the armor of the lower part of the Imperial destroyer. The huge collision sound was transmitted from the battleship armor to the bridge, followed by a huge explosion that made everyone in the bridge black out and lose consciousness. The cruiser that blasted the destroyer was not feeling well at this time. After the shield was broken, all the power was concentrated on the upper part of the diamond-shaped hull of the Mingze cruiser. The huge force flattened the sharp edges, and bursts of flames emerged from the flattened hull. The Mingze cruiser, which was originally moving at a high speed, also slowed down. Behind it, there were two cruisers flying towards the other two Imperial destroyers adjacent to the destroyed destroyer. The Imperial destroyers did not dare to resist and hurriedly avoided them. Obviously, this suicidal collision tactic achieved very good results. A gap was torn in the encirclement of the Imperial fleet, and the Mingze fleet took the opportunity to break through the encirclement formed by the Imperial fleet. After leaving the encirclement, the Mingze warships scattered in all directions, trying to wrap up the Imperial fleet in turn. You want to counter-encircle us? It's wishful thinking. All warships listened to the order, with the destroyed destroyer as the center, spread out in all directions up and down, left and right. And the larger the scattered area, the better. Mingze stared at the holographic screen in front of him, showing the battlefield situation, and ordered loudly. The Imperial warships that received the order withdrew from the encirclement and spread outward with the destroyed destroyer as the center. The Imperial fleet and the Mingze fleet, who wanted to encircle and counter-encircle, spread out like two big nets, and neither could do anything to the other. If they keep firing at each other like this, I don't believe they can beat us. After such a long period of high-intensity fighting, they are already exhausted, Mingze said, looking at the Mingze warships on the holographic screen, whose shooting accuracy and evasion efficiency were getting lower and lower. Your Majesty, we have been using the overclocking mode all the time, which is very harmful to the soldiers. If we continue, their bodies will not be able to bear it, the officer on the side sent a received report to Mingze's terminal. Aren't there some resting personnel on duty? Let them go to work in advance, and send all those who come down from their posts to the infirmary for full body repair, and return to their posts immediately after the repair. Mingze looked at the terminals uploaded by each warship and said helplessly. Although the fleet's shooting accuracy and evasion ability have been reduced in this way, it can at least reach a level slightly higher than that of the Mingze fleet. Moreover, the number of warships in the Mingze fleet has been reduced by more than 1/3. The Imperial fleet, which originally had nearly 1/4 less warships than the Mingze fleet, now has more warships than the Mingze fleet. Your Majesty, the soldiers can no longer hold on. Their brains have begun to show rejection reactions, and they are no longer suitable to continue using the overclocking mode. The director in charge of the fleet's medical department connected Mingze's communicator. Can you still endure for another hour? In 1 hour, we will definitely gain an absolute advantage. Mingze frowned deeply. If the overclocking mode is lost, the two armies with similar technology and fleet numbers will probably be annihilated in the end. Your Majesty, it really can't be done. If they continue to use it, they will all become fools, the director of the medical department insisted. The flagship bridge fell into silence. On the one hand, the overclocking mode was continued. Even if the Empire finally won a tragic victory, all the surviving crew members would become fools. On the other hand, the enemy was slowly worn down until they died together. Both results were unacceptable to everyone. Your Majesty, the enemy has begun to retreat, a soldier suddenly shouted in surprise. Everyone hurriedly enlarged the hologram. Sure enough, most of the Mingze warships had stopped attacking and began to slowly retreat to the rear. Only a small part was still fighting with the Imperial warships to cover the retreat of other warships. All warships, don't pursue. Cease fire and stand by, Mingze ordered decisively. He had a hunch that this battle would end badly. Finding that the Imperial fleet had stopped attacking, the Mingze fleet accelerated its retreat. Your Majesty, there is a communication from the Mingze fleet. Do you want to access it? A signalman turned his head and looked at Mingze. Mingze nodded. Access it. A huge head wearing a helmet appeared on the holographic screen in the middle of the bridge. The dark green helmet panel covered the face of the Mingze man, making it impossible for people to judge his expression. I am the commander of the Mingze main fleet. I am glad to meet you all. The Mingze man on the holographic screen first made a hypocritical polite statement. Hello, I'm the commander of the Imperial fleet, Mingze also replied hypocritically. Suddenly, both sides fell silent. Mingze and Commander Mingze didn't know how to continue the conversation. The scene was very awkward for a while. Ahem, let me be frank. Now our strength is equal. Instead of fighting to the end and both sides perishing, why don't we stop fighting and fight again another day? Commander Mingze suggested somewhat awkwardly. Chapter 145 Rapid Growth Gene, First Update. Well, we can fight again another day, Mingze said and winked at the officer beside him. The officer nodded knowingly and ordered the entire fleet to retreat. The Empire's fleet also slowly retreated. Commander Mingze on the other side of the video turned around and talked to the soldier beside him for a moment, then nodded with satisfaction. Very good, the Empire is very sincere. But next time we meet, it will be either you or me. After saying that, Commander Mingze turned off the communication. The Empire's flagship bridge fell into silence again. Your Majesty, are we just going to withdraw like this? The officer beside him asked somewhat unwillingly. Well, our strategic goal of opening up the channel from Emin Star to the Empire has been achieved, and we have also eliminated 1/3 of the enemy's fleet strength, and obtained the robot samples we need. It doesn't matter whether the Ibero system is needed or not, and it just protrudes from our channel defense line, which is not conducive to our overall defense. It doesn't matter if we don't have it, Mingze explained lightly. Retreat, return to the Waston system, we need to repair it. Mingze stood up from the command seat and walked towards the lounge. The huge Imperial fleet carried the captured transport ships and flew towards the edge of the galaxy. Finally, it disappeared into the universe with blue light at the edge of the star system. A few days later, Waston's system, the Imperial assault fleet left the hyperspace and headed towards the huge space station in the orbit of Waston. In order to speed up the construction of the space station, the Empire mobilized about 90% of the construction ships in the country to build this interstellar Great Wall. This space station and fortress was built by hundreds of construction ships at the same time, every day. The construction speed was beyond imagination. In more than 10 days, the main body of the huge space station was basically completed. After this battle, almost 95% of the warships of the Imperial fleet had varying degrees of damage. When these warships slowly docked at the huge port extending outward from the space station, countless repair ships and repair drones flew out of the repair port and swarmed towards the Imperial fleet like a swarm of bees. Soon, the electric light of the printing equipment starting to work flashed on each warship. On the planet Waston, in a towering building in the capital, Mingze, wearing a well-made casual suit, sat in an office on the top of the municipal building. Looking at the report displayed on the holographic screen, Mingze rubbed his head with a headache. Beep. Beep. The terminal on the table of Mingze flashed, and he reached out to pick up the terminal and clicked on the message. Your Majesty, do you still remember me? A wretched big face appeared in the holographic screen that popped up on the terminal. It was Mohammed, the chief researcher of the alien who was rescued from the alien nest. Aren't you the researcher who studies the alien? What's wrong? Is there any major progress? Mingze certainly remembered who this person was. He also clearly remembered that he handed over a large number of alien corpses and tissue debris to Mohammed for research. Is there any major breakthrough? Yes, Your Majesty. There is a major breakthrough. Mohammed's hands were shaking with excitement. Oh? Tell me quickly, what major discovery? Mingze immediately perked up. Your Majesty, as you know, the growth time of this alien is very short. It only takes dozens of hours to develop into a nearly mature individual. Mohammed put the video recorded in the nest on the lower right corner of the screen. Well, what's the matter, Your Majesty? By extracting the genes of these aliens, we found a special growth gene. This growth gene can accelerate cell division very quickly, allowing organisms to go through more than 10 years in a short period of time. Through experiments on other biological cells, we found that this gene can also play a role in accelerating growth, but the shortened time is not as obvious as that of the alien. Mohammed sent the experimental report on the terminal to Mingze. Well, I will allocate a group of death row prisoners to you and use them for human experiments. Mingze looked at the gratifying data in the experimental report and said with satisfaction. If the experiment goes smoothly, The Empire will usher in another small takeoff this time. A few days later, a spaceship carrying death row prisoners flew to the Biological and Chemical Weapons Research Center on the orbit of Fuji-II. 5 huge disc-shaped silver space stations were connected by dozens of channels of varying thicknesses, and beam cannons for self-defense were rotating on the edge of the disk. After the Empire used the virus to achieve excellent results in the First Foreign War, Mingze allocated funds to expand the Biological Weapons Research Center, which is now 5 times larger than the original space station. Since the passage was opened, the transport ship has been pulling the corpses, wreckage, red dots of the alien mother body and Muhammad to the Biological Weapons Research Center in the Fuji Galaxy to conduct further research on the alien. The spaceship carrying the death row prisoners circled and flew into the port along the huge opening at the top of the space station disk. As the escort ship entered the inner port for unloading special cargo, the alloy door used to seal the port slowly fell, and the port was refilled with air. One by one, the death row prisoners in tights lined up in a long line and walked out of the escort ship, followed by 10 armed guards on both sides of the team. "Hurry up," the guard hit a death row prisoner at the end of the team with the butt of the gun, urging him to keep up with the person in front. The death row prisoner curled his lips in dissatisfaction and quickly followed. "Are these the experimental subjects that your Majesty has transferred?" Muhammad walked up to the captain of the guards and asked. After that, he turned around and looked at the death row prisoners who didn't know what they were going to encounter. "Yes, these are the people. Use them sparingly. There are not many death row prisoners in the Empire recently." The captain of the guards nodded and waved his hand to hand over the death row prisoners to the guards of the laboratory. As the escorted guards returned to the spaceship, the base guards pressed the death row prisoners to the laboratory. A week later, in the M01 laboratory, Mingze and Muhammad stood in front of a row of huge culture tanks. "Your Majesty, the experiment is divided into 2 parts. One is that we implant this gene fragment into adults to see if they will continue to grow rapidly. The second is that we take out the sperm and eggs of the 2 people who have been genetically modified, artificially conceive, and see if we can skip the 20-year development period of humans in the end." Muhammad patted the transparent culture tank and said, "What is the situation now?" Mingze walked around the culture tank and asked a naked female experimental subject in it. "Your Majesty, this gene fragment is very safe. They seem to be linked to the original genes of the human body and will only read the growth period of the human body. As soon as a person reaches the adult limit in the original genes and stops growing, this gene will lose its function and seal itself away," Muhammad explained with joy on his face. Chapter 146, The Newborn Baby Who Failed the Experiment. Second update, please vote. That is to say, if this gene is implanted into humans, then the newborn can grow up in just a few days. Mingze reached out and stroked the smooth glass of the culture tank. "Yes, Your Majesty, but there is a serious flaw at present." Muhammad rubbed his hands and said embarrassedly. "What flaw, Your Majesty? The next scene may be bloody." "Are you sure you want to see it?" Muhammad hesitated. "Don't talk nonsense, take me there." Mingze believed that he had seen all kinds of bloody scenes. "The next part is high energy. Minors and moralists, please do not watch, everything is fiction." A few minutes later, Mingze and Muhammad came to a sealed room through several corridors. The dark room exuded a faint chill, and it seemed that this was a room similar to a freezing room. As Muhammad turned on the switch on the wall, all the lights in the room lit up, illuminating an ice sculpture in the room. "This is..." Mingze opened his mouth in disbelief. In the huge block of ice in the room, a Parker woman who had been sucked dry was lying on a test bench with a distorted face, and her shriveled limbs drooped weakly on both sides of the test bench. The entire abdomen of this Parker woman had been torn apart, and a half-formed Parker was twisted and lying in her belly. It was obvious that the woman's abdomen was burst by the almost fully grown Parker newborn. "Your Majesty, as you can see, we artificially impregnated a Parker female experiment and made her pregnant with a genetically modified newborn, but the energy required for the growth of the newborn was too huge. Before we could give it an infusion, the newborn sucked its mother dry, but even so, the energy was still not enough, causing the newborn to die before it was fully formed." Muhammad swallowed his saliva and continued, "And we didn't expect that the newborn could grow so big in the womb. It was completely to grow up in the womb. I understand why the aliens use that tumor-like embryonic development chamber. The newborns grow directly from fertilized eggs to adults." Muhammad shook his head. "That is to say, humans who have undergone genetic modification are completely incapable of normal human pregnancy and childbirth." Mingze frowned. Yes, Your Majesty. If the two parties have intercourse and the egg cell is fertilized, then this gene will start working at the moment of fertilization. It only takes a few hours to drain the mother's body dry, and it can grow to a size that can burst the mother's body in a day. That is to say, as long as the woman becomes pregnant, she will die in pain with the fetus. Muhammad was a little discouraged. Even if we prohibit genetically modified people from getting pregnant in the future and can only fertilize in culture medium in vitro, there is still a very serious problem. Your Majesty, please follow me, Muhammad sighed and walked out. The two of them went around the corridor again and came to the third laboratory. This laboratory has 5 rooms made of bulletproof glass, and in each room lies a Sith man wearing a large lab coat. When Li Mingze walked to a glass room, the man lying on the ground suddenly jumped up and crawled in front of Li Mingze, staring at Li Mingze with his gray and lifeless eyes, and saliva unconsciously flowed from the corners of his mouth. Hiss! The man let out an undefined roar, his Adam's apple rolled up and down, his mouth unconsciously biting the glass wall, his teeth rubbing against the glass, making a harsh friction sound. Is this the original prisoner? Li Mingze took a step back. Your Majesty, they are the newborns that we formed in 3 days in the culture tank, but as you can see, they only have physical instincts, but no thinking ability of their own, and they still need a long time to learn. Muhammad clapped his hands, and the experimental subjects in the room were knocked unconscious by the chip in their necks. Then what's the use of such people? They can't even be cannon fodder, let alone the Empire's colonial plan. Li Mingze frowned deeply. That's it for now, you continue to study in depth, I'll go back first. Li Mingze seemed to suddenly remember something and walked quickly towards the hibernation room. Muhammad behind him opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but finally closed his mouth. Li Mingze, who returned to the hibernation room, quickly threw himself into the hibernation capsule, and his consciousness returned to the blue bricks on the Sith Star. Li Mingze, who entered the cloned human bodies of the Imperial Royal Research Institute again, put on casual clothes and walked quickly towards the Consciousness Infiltration Equipment Research and Development Center inside the institute. The core achievement of this Research and Development Center is the sleep learning machine that has now become popular. Welcome, Your Majesty. Several researchers put down their work and saluted. Li Mingze waved his hand and quickly passed several people and came to the door of the office of the highest person in charge of the Research and Development Center. With a wave of his hand, the door of the office opened to both sides, and the chief scientist who was reading the report was startled. Hello, Your Majesty. Why are you here? Isn't the Empire at war with the Mingze Alliance? The chief scientist was surprised by Li Mingze's sudden visit. Let me ask you, what is the maximum time flow rate in the latest model of sleep learning machine? Li Mingze walked to the desk and stared at the chief scientist. Well, the maximum speed that ordinary people can withstand is 5 times the time flow rate, but it will consume a lot of energy. If a special injection is used, the time flow rate that the human body can accept will reach 10 times, the chief scientist replied after hesitating. That is to say, 1 year in reality is equivalent to 10 years in the learning machine, Li Mingze confirmed. Yes, Your Majesty, but this is extremely harmful to the human body. The lifespan of a person will be shortened by up to 10 years. Under normal circumstances, it is not recommended to use this method. The chief scientist did not know what Li Mingze was going to do, but kindly dissuaded him. The average lifespan of the Sith people is about 260 years now. Subtract 10 years and there are still 250 years. Subtract the accelerated 20 years and there are still 230 years left. That's enough, Li Mingze muttered to himself. Your Majesty, what do you want to do? The chief scientist asked indirectly. Don't ask too much. Please help me calculate. Subtract the sleep time of a normal person. How long is a day in reality equivalent to in the learning machine? Li Mingze said seriously. Even if you need to sleep 8 hours a day in reality is equivalent to 15 days in the learning machine, that is to say, to reach the 20 years of a normal person's adulthood. It only takes 1 year and 4 months in the learning machine, Li Mingze said happily. I received the notice. It will be on the shelves on Friday. Chapter 147 New What Project, First Update. Order the game design department of the Consciousness Infiltration Machine to abandon the subsequent development of the current fantasy and invest their energy into building a 100% virtual world, Li Mingze ordered in a tough tone. Now the rise of our empire is only a matter of time, ha ha ha. Li Mingze smiled and walked out of the office, and the chief scientist behind him was confused. I will have someone send you the detailed description of the new What Creates Humans plan when I go back. You need to research some equipment in a targeted manner." Li Mingze paused at the door and turned back to say to the chief scientist who followed him, "Yes, Your Majesty." The chief scientist stopped his respectful steps and nodded in response. A few days later, a highly confidential department called New was established in Qingzhuan. The plan for the new What Creates Humans plan was also sent from Qingzhuan to several major scientific researchers. The new What Creates Humans plan, as the name suggests, is the mythical new What creating humans with mud. And this plan is to use the fast-growing genes of the aliens to ripen a large number of Sith humans. Then use the virtual real world in the consciousness infiltration machine, sleep learning machine, to experience their life from birth to adulthood. When they turn 20, they will be told the truth and put into the real society from the cultivation tank. If this plan succeeds, the Empire will usher in a population surge every year and a half, and the population that limits the development of the Empire will no longer be a problem. Moreover, people who grow up in the virtual world can let the Empire shape their lives, which can make them extremely loyal and very good talents for expanding the territory. At that time, the population on Earth will be dispensable to the Empire. And the newborns born in the plan have a new name, New Humans. The subsequent human experiments were very successful, proving that the new What Creates Humans plan is not only feasible in theory, but also an executable plan in reality. The Empire can cultivate new humans in large quantities. In a barren star system near the capital star system of the Sith Empire, because the mineral veins in the entire galaxy are extremely scattered and have no special mining value, and there are no life planets in the entire galaxy, it has always been an uninhabited area with only a few detectors distributed in this galaxy. But the tranquility of this dead galaxy was soon broken. On the planet 00342, now named Nuwa Star, hundreds of huge transport ships descended from the sky. As the transport ship landed, the hatch of the transport ship opened upwards, and the deck inside the cabin fell to the ground, forming a passable steep slope with the transport ship. One after another, engineering vehicles drove down from the transport ship. In less than a day, hundreds of huge temporary bases appeared on the plains of Nuwa Star. Li Mingze also came to a base on Nuwa Star through the Advent substitute on the transport ship. Standing on the command tower near the center of the base, Li Mingze looked at the huge pit that was slowly being dug in the center of the base. One after another, huge drilling rigs were fixed on the platforms surrounding the big hole. Following the command of the commander, dozens of laser drills descended into the big pit. As the head of the drill rig emitted a red light, the solid soil layer on the surface melted like snow, was sucked away by the suction device in the middle of the drill rig, and was transported to the refining and forging center on one side of the base along the huge pipeline behind the drill rig. All the excavated waste will be refined into useful materials, and the remaining waste will be transported to the neighboring planets by transport ships, and then the existing materials and the refined materials will be mixed to forge useful steel. Your Majesty, we have now established 320 excavation bases on Nuwa Star. Together with the second batch of 280 and the subsequent batches, we will have up to 6,000 comprehensive bases integrating excavation, manufacturing and construction on this planet. The head of the Nuwa project stood behind Li Mingze and reported, "It only takes us 8 months to hollow out the crust layer of this planet from 30 kilometers to 10 kilometers above the ground. Considering the huge pressure on the ground, this layer of space will be arranged in a honeycomb shape, with each hexagonal space 2 kilometers apart. The excavated minerals will be forged into load-bearing structures and filled in each hexagonal underground space. When the project is completed, we will place cultivation chambers for cultivating new humans in these honeycombs. According to the current calculated space, we can cultivate up to 32 billion new humans at a time." The head of the Nuwa project slowly explained the general situation of the project. 32 billion. Very good. I hope you can speed up the project. Resources and talents are not a problem. The focus of the Empire's development will be tilted towards you. Li Mingze clapped his hands. But Your Majesty, the energy required for so many training equipment is not a small amount. If we build a power station, the cost will be too high. The project leader carefully expressed his concerns. Don't worry about this. The orbital solar array used to power the Nuwa project is already in the design. When you finish digging the underground space, the orbital solar array will be almost completed. Li Mingze waved his hand, indicating that the person in charge should not worry about it. Hurry up, I have to go back to the front line. When I defeat the Mbechi alliance, I want to see the completion of the Nuwa project. Li Mingze turned and walked towards the door without looking back. Yes, Your Majesty. We will hurry up. The project leader hurriedly stood at attention and saluted to guarantee demarcation line. On the Ilfan star, Li Mingze, who had replaced his substitute without stopping, came to the newly completed fortress in the orbit of this planet. Now, both the main fleets of Mbechi and the Empire are in the process of repair. Both sides have fallen into a strange state of peace, and even the small spacecraft for exploring the way has not appeared. Taking advantage of this great opportunity, Li Mingze tilted all the resources in the Empire to the defense line composed of the Gavria Galaxy, the place where the Emin star jumped out, the Havel Galaxy, the recruitment point of the consort army, the Ilfan Galaxy, the star, the first actual combat of the new recruits of the consort army, and the Waston Galaxy, the border of the Empire. A huge space fortress equipped with hyperspace traps has been built on the orbit of the main planets of each galaxy. There are independent turrets and unmanned launch platforms around the fortress, and on the planet facing the fortress. There are high-powered anti-orbital cannons under construction. The space fortress that Li Mingze came to at this moment is the space station responsible for the defense of the Ilfan Galaxy. This huge silver octagonal space station is covered with huge turrets comparable to the main guns of the fleet, and around the huge turrets are some missile launchers and small interception devices. Through the hanging windows of the space station, you can see thousands of flat independent artillery platforms surrounding the space station and missile launchers that look like two long boxes spliced together. It will be available tomorrow. Please subscribe. Line of defense under attack. Li Mingze, who was standing at the porthole and looking out, suddenly saw lightning flashing in the space in front of the space fortress. Is the enemy coming? Li Mingze was not moved at all, and still stood calmly by the porthole and looked out. A shrill alarm sounded, and the lights in the corridor turned red, reflecting Li Mingze's cheeks red. With the sound of mechanical operation, the glass outside the hanging window was covered by the lowered armor plate. The window blocked by the armor was transformed into a holographic image of the real scene outside captured by the camera. At this time, the official in charge of receiving Li Mingze was so nervous that his palms were sweating. You know, this is located in the landscape corridor of the fortress. Even if there is active armor outside, the thin armor can't withstand a few attacks. Your Majesty, it's too dangerous here. Let's go to the control center, the official on the side carefully suggested, hoping that this bold emperor would not stay in this dangerous place. You go, I'll stay here. Li Mingze waved his hand. Your Majesty, if Li Mingze didn't leave, the official didn't dare to leave, fearing that he would be held accountable. Let's go. I understand. Li Mingze glanced at the official and understood. After confirming that it was really okay to leave, the official saluted and stepped back. Li Mingze stood alone in front of the window and looked at the flashes in the starry sky. A transport ship appeared in front of the space station with a purple light, but the smart Empire did not use the salvo method this time, but started firing clockwise from the outermost turrets, with a firing interval of 0.01 seconds for each turret. The radar of the space station detected that it was just a transport ship and not a fleet, and it took only 0.3 seconds to respond to the ceasefire order to many turrets. The Empire's firepower trap only fired 30 beam cannons, which easily tore the transport ship used to track the Empire's salvo. I knew you would play this trick. Li Mingze, who came up with a clockwise delayed salvo method, put on his usual sneer on his face. Next, your main fleet will appear, Li Mingze said to himself while looking at the debris in the air. After confirming that the first warship used to track firepower had been destroyed, 4 huge launch rails rose in the space fortress. One by one, space mines equipped with small disposable boosters were fired from the launch rails and flew to the vicinity of the Pathfinder spacecraft. Soon, the originally empty space was filled with flashing mines, and countless mines were crowded together, waiting for prey to come. As expected, Li Mingze did not expect that after the first unmanned spacecraft used to track firepower appeared, the second flash appeared in space in less than 10 minutes. This is the cooling and charging time of our main weapon. It's a pity that we can't do as you wish. Li Mingze waved at the camera, and a housekeeping robot brought up the tables, chairs, snacks and drinks that had been prepared long ago. You still understand me? Li Mingze raised the drink and toasted to the camera. You're welcome. Tianyi's voice came from the chip in Li Mingze's mind. Li Mingze nodded, stretched out his hand to pull the chair beside him, found a comfortable sitting position, put his legs on the handrail of the viewing corridor, and then reached out to pick up snacks from the seat, watching the battle that was about to happen outside the space station with relish. More than 10 seconds later, a huge fleet jumped out of hyperspace, but as soon as they left hyperspace, they attracted the floating mines floating around. Thousands of floating mines flew quickly towards the nearest warship. The intelligent computer on the warship just found something wrong and turned the muzzle of the melee gun over when the floating mines had already hit it. Thousands of huge lights flashed, blasting the concentrated warship shields into light spots all over the sky, and the armor of the warship was also slightly melted by the huge heat. Now, shoot. Blow them up, Mingze waved his hand and shouted, stuffing a handful of popcorn into his mouth. After the surrounding independent artillery positions were confirmed to be the main battleship group through radar scanning, they did not open fire in a clockwise delayed shooting manner. Instead, all the red beams were poured onto the main fleet of Mingze in the center of the circle in an instant. The dazzling light streaked across the starry sky, cutting the warships in the Mingze fleet that had lost their shields into dozens of pieces. A huge explosion occurred in these pieces, blowing the pieces into countless fragments. The fragments driven by the explosion hit the shields of the surrounding warships, causing ripples of blue light. Beautiful, Mingze waved his fist fiercely in the air, and a lot of popcorn in his hand fell. He grabbed a handful of popcorn and stuffed it into his mouth again, staring at the battlefield intently. Tianyi, who was watching Mingze through the camera, couldn't help rolling his eyes. He had been the emperor for so many years, and he still had such an interesting side. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but smile. The Mingze fleet, which was seriously injured by a blow, was unwilling to bombard the independent artillery around the fortress with orbital guns. Shells flew out of the muzzles of the Mingze warships and flew towards the artillery in the distance. The turrets without mobility and shields had no chance to dodge, and were shattered like paper under the attack of these kinetic shells. Do you think this is the end? Mingze stopped grabbing the popcorn. Soon, dozens of huge beams of light rose from the surface of the planet and shot towards the Mingze fleet. The huge beams of light pierced through the clouds in the sky and shot straight at the Mingze warships that did not react. The shields of the warships that were illuminated trembled wildly, and soon they could not hold on and shattered into a sky full of light. However, it was obvious that the stamina of this beam cannon was a little insufficient. It only shattered the shield of the spacecraft and disappeared. At this time, it was obvious that the commander of Mingze was also confused. Why didn't this anti-orbital cannon focus on attacking a few warships, but wasted it on the shields? You know, when the Empire's weapons have cooled down, their shields will almost be restored. It was not until thousands of fighter planes swarmed out from the back of the space fortress that the Mingze fleet realized that something was wrong. Only then did they notice that the first wave of warships destroyed by the Empire were actually destroyers and frigates responsible for air defense. The cruisers responsible for heavy firepower support were not even hit by beam cannons, except for being blown up by floating mines. They had lost most of their defense capabilities against fighters without knowing it. If the Empire's fighters got close to them, the consequences would be disastrous. Prepare for emergency jump, the commander of the Mingze fleet shouted, written before the book is put on the shelves, because I know that many of you will go to read pirated copies after seeing the words of thanks for the book being put on the shelves. You also know that this book of mine is a niche one on Kidian.com. I cannot sustain it without subscriptions. After all, the author needs to make money to support his family. A book that no one reads and has no subscriptions. To be honest, I have already prepared a new book. When this one fails too badly, I will condense and tell the story as soon as possible. So I hope that everyone can support the genuine version. It's only 20 cents a day, which allows me to support a family and concentrate on writing. If you find the genuine version too troublesome, you can give the author a few dollars as a rewardee. 20 updates tomorrow. Chapter 149, Remarks on the Release. The following are the comments on the release of the book that you often see. It has been 80 days. This book has been on the shelves for 80 days, and it will finally be released tomorrow. The release time is tomorrow at noon, and 20 chapters will be released at a time tomorrow. If the results are good, there will be regular updates in the future. Those who can see this are all old readers of this book. I hope everyone will subscribe, or at least give a first order. Thank you. And my editor-in-charge, Boss Lan Guang, I must thank him, the leader of my online writing. The daily subscription money is only 2 or 3 cents, and the amount is not much. Brothers, if you can support me, please support me. Thank you. I sincerely thank those friends who have voted for me, rewarded me and always supported me. Thank you, really. Especially those who have been supporting me since I posted a few words in the book. I have always remembered those IDs. As a niche book, I sincerely hope that everyone can subscribe more and support it. Thank you, brothers and sisters. Chapter 150 Melee. First update, please subscribe. Report to the commander. It will take another 12 hours to recharge the jump engine. The soldier on the side shook his head while looking at the console. Send all our fighters and unmanned turrets to fight the Empire to the death, the commander of the Mingze fleet gritted his teeth and ordered. Yes, sir. The cruisers and destroyers that received the order released the fighters in the hangar at once, and even the maintenance drones were thrown out with the idea of attracting the attention of the Empire's fighters. As the armor under the diamond-shaped hull of the Mingze battleship unfolded to both sides, fighters and drones swarmed out of the hangar, followed by the floating turrets that had once shown their strength. The fighters of both sides tore into each other in the gunfire, and a small firework bloomed in the sky from time to time. Compared with the Mingze alliance, the pilots used by the Empire this time were all Parkers and Mingze trained through consciousness infiltration machines. The Empire did not feel sorry for the loss of these cannon fodder-like pilots, but it was just a waste of a fighter. So Mingze was still drinking his drink leisurely, without any emotional fluctuations in his heart, as if this war had nothing to do with him. But it was different for the Mingze alliance. The pilots of these fighters were carefully trained by the Mingze alliance, and it took a lot of time and materials. Seeing the green dots representing his own fighters disappearing on the screen, the commander of the Mingze fleet was bleeding. Soon the cooling time of the Empire's space fortress weapons was up, and the muzzles of the huge beam cannons glowed red again. A series of red beams flew towards the Mingze fleet again, but the damage to the Mingze warships, which had already dispersed their formations and began to maneuver irregularly, was significantly reduced. Most of the beams flew past the Mingze warships, and the results obtained were very limited. Fight back, the commander of Mingze ordered loudly. The Mingze fleet, which had finished cooling, also fired shells at the Empire's fortress. Mingze sat in the sightseeing corridor and looked at the oncoming railgun shells without feeling a trace of fear. Instead, he grabbed a handful of popcorn. As the orbital shells bombarded the shield of the Imperial space fortress, blue ripples appeared outside the fortress. It was obvious that the shield of the Imperial fortress was much thicker, and the salvo of the Mingze fleet did not break the shield of the fortress. Launched nuclear torpedoes, the commander of the Mingze fleet found that hundreds of his fighters had unknowingly approached the Imperial fortress in the fight, and gave the order with a sneer. The Mingze fighters that were fighting with the Imperial fighters suddenly stopped chasing and turned around to fly towards the Imperial fortress. The Imperial fighters, which found that something was wrong, followed closely, and the fighters continued to spray several beams, but they were all flexibly dodged by the Mingze pilots. At this time, the difference between cannon fodder and elites was revealed. The fortress anti-aircraft guns that found the fighters approaching sprayed beams, but only shot down more than 30 fighters, and the other beams were dodged by the experienced Mingze pilots. After flying near the Imperial fortress, the belly armor of the Alliance fighter opened to both sides, and a huge torpedo was slowly pushed out. With the ignition of the jet at the tail of the torpedo, the bulky torpedo flew towards the space fortress. After launching the torpedo, the fighter lifted the control stick and circled in the air and retreated. Quick! All close-in defense guns open fire, the person in charge in the space fortress control room said anxiously. But it was too late. The large number of close-in defense guns only had time to intercept half of the torpedoes, and the other half bombarded the Imperial fortress. As many as 200 nuclear torpedoes hit the fortress and exploded at the moment. Everyone on the battlefield felt that they had lost their vision. The strong light produced at the moment of the explosion was as bright as the sun. The shield of the fortress was instantly shattered by more than 200 little suns, revealing the armor inside. Very good. All battleships' secondary guns focus on the space fortress. Crash the seriously injured battleships, Commander Mingze gritted his teeth and ordered viciously. After receiving the order, the Mingze fleet no longer wasted firepower on the surrounding independent artillery platforms, but aimed at the space fortress that had lost its shield protection. One after another, the accelerated solid shells flew towards the fortress, bombarding the armor of the fortress like a rainstorm covering the sky and the earth. The huge kinetic energy was released on the armor of the fortress, and the huge impact caused the armor of the fortress to deform rapidly. The loud noise caused by the impact spread throughout the entire fortress through the walls. The continuous bangs made everyone in the fortress panic. Although they knew that the armor of the fortress would not be broken by the shells in a short time, they were still a little nervous. Li Mingze was no longer idle at this time. Just now, several warheads hit the movable armor covering the window in front of him. The huge impact force made the entire armor concave inward. The concave armor smashed the window in the landscape corridor, and the glass fragments of the window fell all over Li Mingze, and the holographic image in front of the window also flickered and disappeared. What bad luck! Li Mingze shook off the glass shards on his body, got up and walked towards the control room. Long live His Majesty! As soon as Li Mingze entered the control room, everyone stood up and saluted. It seemed that the Emperor's presence restored everyone's confidence. How long will it take for the Empire's fleet to jump out of hyperspace? Li Mingze sat on the command seat in the center of the room. Your Majesty, the Empire's fleet will arrive in just an hour, the person in charge replied respectfully. Protect the hyperspace trap generator. We must let the Empire's support fleet appear directly on the battlefield. If we let them come from the edge of the galaxy, our defense line will not be able to hold. Li Mingze nodded and ordered. Suddenly, a huge explosion was heard, followed by a violent vibration, and even the lights in the control room flickered. Your Majesty, the armor of our A03 area has been penetrated. The energy warehouse in A03 area was hit and exploded just now, a soldier reported to Li Mingze. Send all maintenance drones to the front of the fortress to block the shells, and activate the number 1 emergency record, Li Mingze said calmly as if he had expected it long ago. Yes. Activate the number 1 emergency record. The soldier repeated and entered a string of passwords on the console in front of him. In the corridor near the front of the fortress, a large amount of liquid was sprayed downwards by the fire sprinklers, and soon the empty corridor was filled with a transparent liquid. As a flash of lightning flashed in the corridor, the transparent liquid turned into viscous gel. The entire dozen floors of the front of the fortress were filled with this gel, and the liquid stopped only when the huge storage tank at the back of the fortress ran out of liquid. If you jump around, you may not be able to see the holes I filled and dug. Ho ha ho ha. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone, see you in the next video.